July 27th meeting of the Windham Southeast Supervisory District Board to order at 6:01 p.m. I'm going to ask people to be patient for another minute or two while we let some more people in. So if you wouldn't mind just being patient, we'll get started in a few minutes. Thanks. Okay, we'll get started at 6:03. There still are people trickling in, but they're coming one or two at a time instead of 10 or 11. So a brief change in the agenda from the previous meeting. We have moved the public participation for items not on the agenda up to the top so that we can start with the public comments. But before we do that, I am going to ask Andy Skarzinski, our superintendent, to do a brief presentation, information about the planning process so far toward opening, and then we will take people's questions and comments until everyone has had their opportunity, and we respond as much as we possibly can. So, Andy, I'm going to I believe you can share the screen at this point if you want to do that.
I'm still disabled, David, to share that.
Let me try again. Try it now.
Okay, we got it. So as I've said with other people, you know, please do not judge me by my multiple tabs I have open up top. They're all a variety of different things. And so we've been meeting as a group to look at our reentry planning and the work that's been going on. And there was this video clip that came out, you know, several years ago, and it was a kind of a commercial for a software development company or an employment search company. And it was this idea of people parachuting onto an airplane. And the idea was this notion of building the plane while we're flying it. And, you know, in some ways, the work that we've been doing has been similar to that. And you'll hear why this has been going on. I will say that this has really been an all hands on deck approach to thinking about a reopening, conceptualizing it. The leadership teams, the teacher work groups, our school nurses, our school staff, our facility managers and maintainers have been phenomenal in doing this level of work. And it has been absolutely incredible to see everyone pulling together. The work around this is we've tried to be nimble and responsive to changing and evolving information. And, I think we're at the point right now where we have to focus on forging ahead. I will say, just like there was an article or a recent blog post that had gone around through a different supervisory union about some of the challenges that have been embedded in this level of planning work. I receive several emails a day with suggestions on how we to do that, and I would love to respond to them all. There are a lot of great ideas that are out there. We have to, at this point, though, continue to forge ahead with where we are for the mere reason that our principals have to get their buildings moving and things going forward. And so we can have some level of consistency with things. So our critical points when we start looking at the planning is that our priority has been on in-person instruction. Now, whether that's, and as you'll see, the work has been focused on that level of in-person instruction because we know where we need our students to be. We also know that there's a balance in that many of our students are not able to attend to school for a variety of either health-related reasons or other factors or health factors of their family members. And that's, you'll see it, and we talk about the guidance coming up where this all came into play. So student and staff safety are our guiding directive in this level of work. And so if there was one thing that we focused upon in this initial work was how do we reopen buildings so that everyone is safe? In our planning efforts, we've talked about the first 5 to 6 weeks of school will really be an emphasis on community building and establishing relationships. We'll know by that point that students will not have been in school for 5.5 months. And that need to establish relationships, again, will be a priority in the work that's being done. And we've developed this plan to be a slow and cautious start. And so we know some of our facilities have limited capacity to meet the physical distancing guidelines that have been proposed. And so when we identify not only what are those physical distancing limitations within the facilities, but also what are the items that have to be put into place so that staff are comfortable and students are also comfortable with this. Remember, the work that we're doing with, developing these spaces really requires a significant amount of reteaching our expectations and reteaching protocols and procedures, or candidly, teaching procedures and practices that no one's ever had to do before in a school. So starting slowly and cautiously for us has been really one of the most important things. In the guidance we've received, most of it is just guidance. The one aspect of things that are required are facial coverings. And so all staff and students and anyone in the building must have a facial covering on. We focused on using physical guidelines, and if you've read the Agency of Education or Department of Health guidance or from the CDC, physical distancing guidelines are in effect when feasible and possible. You do know that we have ample outdoor spaces at many of our schools, and we anticipate using those outdoor spaces for place-based learning and mask breaks if possible. Vermont has staged the reentry in a variety of steps. Step 1 is fully remote, and that's what we were in last spring. We do anticipate that we might be in fully remote coming again if there was the need to do so. And so while we're focusing on reopening, we're also bolstering our remote readiness. But step 2 is that reentry level that has the greatest level of restrictions and guidance around what are the physical spacing limitations and what are the protocols we need to have in place. Step 3, however, is where the buses will be reopened. And that's because for practicality and feasibility purposes, we would need to have probably triple the amount of buses, which is not a feasible aspect. Important in this work is that we receive guidance from the Agency of Education related to what they would call hybrid learning options. And when we talk about hybrid learning options, it's important that the definition of that, to know that it's different at the Agency of Education level than it is in a school level on the ground. In the interpretation of the Agency of Education and the Secretary, hybrid really refers to the ability or capacity of a district to offer multiple learning venues, whether that is an in-person or fully remote or anything in between. That guidance we received came out around July 15th. And as soon as we received that, we turned it around and let our faculty and our parents know of these options were available to us, and we'll be doing some planning around that. It seems like it would be, not necessarily a difficult decision to make about what this means for families and why this took place, but the the impact of attendance and the criteria around attendance really delved into some regulatory information and requirements. And that's why we received that information on the 15th. In the middle of all this, we did work on the same day we received the agreement from our education association, our teachers union, to be able to talk about moving our calendar. And so we adjusted our calendar to include 2 additional professional development days on the 27th and 28th of August instead of starting school on the 31st. I mean, starting school those days and then moving the start of school to the 31st. We were able to do that without any sort of impact on the end of the year. And keeping in mind that these are the dates that we know right now. If we've learned anything from this, is that the information around this is fluid, constantly moving, and some of those changes may come up. If you read the letter in the blog post from the superintendent up in Hardwick, she did indicate that we did receive, in full transparency, a survey question from the Secretary of Education asking us if we would support the declaration of a mandatory start of school after Labor Day to allow districts more time to to prepare for this work. And so I put that out there as a caution that as of right now, the 31st is our official start of school date for students. That may change based upon guidance we receive from the Agency of Education in the state of Vermont. And we've used a team structure for this task completion. So some timeline pieces for us to also to have a sense of it. We received the Strong and Healthy Start document. That came out mid-June. We met as a leadership group July 23rd, where we looked at how many students can we fit into each classroom. We looked at an exact square footage, that 36 square feet per student, and looking at what's in the room and what comprises the room. And then we looked at a practical standpoint of really what makes sense. If you take 36 square feet per student and you multiply it times 20, all you would need would be a 720 square foot facility. However, practically, that makes it difficult when you calculate it into hallways and transition times and what does this look like and what are other items in the classroom. So we had to look at it in 2 different categories. On July 1st, the reopening process really started. We divided into action teams. There was a continuity of learning group, health and safety, policy and operations, and communication. That July 15th date, as I mentioned, that's when we received guidance from the AOE regarding remote learning options. We initially told parents about a survey on July 20th regarding remote learning, and we administered a parent and staff survey with a due date of July 26th from families. So on July 27th, we reviewed, and that's today, we reviewed this information with our leadership team. Along with this guidance, we have some other fixed dates that we can talk about. The Agency of Education is distributing 720 KN95 masks to WSESU, and that means that's one per staff member. We were given that survey back early to mid-July. We were informed by the AOE that the agency and the state would be purchasing KN95 masks. They're not surgical grade masks, but they are outstanding masks for what we need. We have a team going to pick those up tomorrow, and those will be added to the distribution items that our school nurses and our health and safety team have ordered for the district. So our anticipated completion of our draft document at central office is on or around July 31st. We anticipate finalizing this draft and having initial feedback forms around the 7th, with additional reopening plans and feedback forms the 10th through the 14th. And so as we start working on these documents, the sharing of this information will be critical because we want parents to be able to alert students and their children about what some of the changes will look like in school when we reopen. We know it's not going to be a typical opening of school. The big hooray at the start of the year in many of our schools, we can't do that this year because of the limits to having no outside visitors in our facilities. But we want parents to start working on that and sharing that information. So we want to have this information out to parents by the 14th. And hopefully not later than that. So it's an ambitious timeline. In terms of staff input and the work that's been done and the work that will be done, staff input has been through our site-based action teams. We've also had staff forums via Zoom. We conducted one elementary Zoom meeting and one secondary meeting. Staff participation with action teams will be expanding this week, and so we'll be sending out a request for additional staff participation on our action teams. Staff have also participated through our leadership advisory councils. We did administer staff surveys at both the building and the district level. We've sought additional staff feedback for them we'll be seeking additional staff feedback through our draft plan. And I'm in frequent and regular communication with WSEA. And so family feedback, we've had, I feel as if, as I started July 1st, and I think I've spent probably 40 or more hours in Zoom meetings. We've conducted family forums with most of our schools. We have a few more to conduct. And again, a lot of the scheduling of the Zoom meetings has been done in a way that we've tried to meet family times. And so a lot of those occur 6, 7 o'clock at night, so that we can be able to find parents the greatest time when most parents are home and available to be on Zoom to ask questions and hear where we are. Some of that information changes from week to week and meeting to meeting. And a lot of it's just a reflection of what we know at that time. We've had family surveys at the school level as well as at the district level. The recent survey asked parents to identify would they prefer an in-person or a remote learning option, given that the in-person would be a couple days a week within the building for their children, at least at the very start of elementary and for the semester at the secondary. And we have additional family forums that will be scheduled prior to the middle of August. And so we're trying to find as many opportunities and avenues to connect with parents to seek feedback. We've also, tried to provide feedback to parents regularly. And this, we will most likely take this information and put it into a release to send out to parents later this week as well. So we had some questions in the past around where are we with our expenditures, and the COVID expenditures, the fiscal realities of that this will cost the district extra, will cost us funding. Much of the money will come through the Corona Relief Funds, or the CRF monies that have been allocated. We have spent thus far our money that we anticipate that will be going to the CRF between FY20, so the fiscal year that just wrapped up, and fiscal year 21, $641,000. Our teachers and nurses have also been using 1% funds, and so those are those guaranteed professional learning funds that are mandated. 1% funds are being used for the planning for reopening and how can teachers create more engaging, more robust remote learning activities, more engaging in-person activities, given that we're just coming off of this long period of closure, as well as our school nurses are working on the planning work that goes into the reopening of schools. We are appointing, or we have appointed, 2 summer stipended COVID-19 coordinators. So those are individuals that are directly interfacing with all our action teams. They're meeting with their central office team. They're meeting with our bus company. They're interfacing with our facility managers to make sure that we have all the tools and materials in place to be successfully and safely open for students. And we'll be posting for a full-time COVID coordinator as soon as we develop the policy and posting language, the job description language around that. That individual it'll be requiring a school nursing certificate and someone working as a school nurse, so they have that medical background. Our health and safety team has also been working on what we call PPE, or personal protective equipment. They've looked into ordering, and much of this has already been ordered, and then other items on this list that still have to be ordered, but in terms of the items going out, they're looking at nitrile gloves with one box per adult, disposable masks, 1 box per adult, purchasing at least 3 infrared thermometers per school, and that's based upon the student population as well as batteries. Alcohol wipes for those infrared thermometers, gowns, face shields, hand sanitizers, spray bottles and dry wipes, communicator masks, clear masks, digital thermometers, cloth facial coverings, and at least 1 per student. So these are items that are currently in process of being ordered. Much of this is being shipped to the high school and redistributed from there. That same group, 2 members from the same group, are the ones going to coordinate the KN95 mask pickups tomorrow, which is our distribution date from the AOE. So in terms of our reopening framework, as I've said, we've looked at things through a cautious approach. Oh, let me go back here. Sorry, I jumped ahead a page there. The cautious approach has really been around how are we maintaining this level of safety for all people within the building. And it means we have a balance of structure and developmental needs for connection. We have planned a midweek deep cleaning, and so when we look at the model, we bring in two cohorts of students for the first part of the week, a deep clean where everyone's remote, and then we bring in 2 extra cohorts. So we're minimizing those contact tracing. You'll hear me talk about that throughout the other parts of this presentation as well. There is a daily health screen requirement, and this is a piece that we continue to talk about and we look at in terms of what's pragmatic, what's practical, what's also in the safest interest of students. Guidance right now is a little mixed on what the daily health screen is. And the daily health screen is really a temperature check, inquiring if to students and staff, have you been in contact with people with COVID-19? Or are you exhibiting any symptoms of COVID-19? The practical aspect of that health screen and doing it at the schoolhouse doors may mean in some facilities, the clustering of students for several minutes, upwards of a half an hour or longer. And we want to make sure that what we're doing is not creating unintended consequences of creating conditions for socially, connected people or people not following social distance or physical distancing guidelines. It's the same issue with the bus transportation. And so this is a topic that we're still developing. What does this look like? Our current thinking, and we're still waiting for more guidance from the Agency of Education on this, is having a paper screen that students would submit. If they do not have that paper screen, then we would look at other options for that child to be screened at that point. But this would be to facilitate moving students into the building or onto buses without creating dangerous situations. For instance, a bus pulled over for 5 or 6 minutes, trying to screen all students boarding that bus, but doing such in a way that would be practical and safe for everyone. We've talked about physical distancing when it's feasible, possible, and practical. As you may have seen or may not have seen, the Agency of Education has not really given clear and specific guidance around how close and how far people may be away, as other states have. The language that's been used has been done to give a degree of flexibility with larger school districts and tighter populations. But those physical distancing is when feasible, possible, and practical. We're developing our plan right now to create the greatest physical distancing within students and staff as we can. And then thinking about starting slowly, as we've said, moving people in as people are more comfortable with the roles and routines and rituals of the school in terms of what the new normal will be for the foreseeable future. The scheduling of the buildings and all facilities is really designed to minimize student movement in the building during the day. And so students may be in one classroom for longer periods of time. We have an emphasis, as we've said, on community building and social emotional work. We know that we cannot delve into academics until we have students feeling safe where they are. And that's going to be absolutely critical that there's a time spent for this purposeful use of our efforts to build community relationships and establish a comfort level and address some of the issues and challenges that students may have been without having been in school for the last 5.5 months. Contact tracing is something that will occur if there is a positive test, whether it's within school or if it's in the community. But that level of maintaining that capability for contact tracing is driving a lot of our efforts. And so we're looking at smaller cohorts whenever possible and feasible to limit the breadth of contact tracing. And so contact tracing would be done through the Department of Health if there were a positive test, but they would ask, like, who have you been in contact with? And they would work with identifying those folks that were in contact with any sort of positive test, if necessary, to see were there any risks of infection or anything else. And that the design of that is to be aware, and so that we can also look at what actions the school would have to take. Students are limited within their groups, and again, that's part of our framework. When we think about supports coming into the classroom, whether that's a special education support or a counselor support or some level of intervention support, we're thinking it more as being push-in support so that individual go into the classroom, or if it was pull-out, that pull-out would come out from a single classroom in our first month. Once we hit step 3, and some of those restrictions are lifted, or we can look to a little looser environment, we will be able to pull students out from multiple classrooms at the same time to work together. But right now, the pullouts will be from one classroom at a time, allow the teacher to then clean their space before they pull out a different student. And again, it's about limiting the contact and the potential spread. And we're still evaluating our options for specials teachers. Specials, what we call, specials, unified arts or exploratory classes. Those are our musics, our arts, our physical educations, our technology courses, anything else that doesn't fall in the umbrella of those traditional academic courses. We know that those are critical to students, their growth and their development. But we also have to strike a balance between the level of contact that those teachers have with multiple classrooms at one time. And so we're examining what's the best allocation of those teachers and what's the best way to reach multiple audiences of students at one time for the purpose of meeting those learning needs that students have. For many of our kids, we know that specials are the highlight of their day. We want to honor that and recognize that level of work and that attention that students have to the day, and looking forward to specific teachers. But we have to make sure that we're helping everyone be safe as possible within that. So these are some of the questions in terms of, as I mentioned, the different protocols that we're talking. This came from a presentation that was made earlier in the, at the VSBA conference, and this came from a local epidemiologist. And this talks about, some of those questions that we asked about. Like, so have you been in close contact with someone with COVID-19? Have you have any symptoms of COVID-19? And then some of those temperature checks, and these are the things that we would do on a daily basis. So within the reopening framework, transportation is starting at what we call step 3. And that means less physical distancing between students. And so because of this, and because of the critical elements around it, we are encouraging parents to be able to transport their children when possible. We know that many of our families are not able to do so. And we want to make sure that we're trying to limit those transportation needs to those that just really need it. And that would allow us to kind of have some of those physical distancing practices put into place without overburdening the drivers of the bus system. The bus drivers themselves will be gloved, masked when the students are boarding, and students will be assigned 1 per seat if it's practical and wearing masks. As I've mentioned before, there's a screening ticket that we're working on, and that would be an indicator of where those critical questions asked around exposure to COVID-19 and temperature checks that would be done. We are going to be having bus signups, almost like we'll have a survey that will be going out. If parents need transportation, we are asking that all parents would sign up for the bus. Everyone is eligible for the bus, and I want to reiterate that everyone can take the bus. However, we want families that need the bus to sign up, and this will allow for our plotting of our bus runs, as well as give clear information to the bus company, and it'll also aid in any sort of need for contact tracing in the future. So those students that would require the bus will need to sign up for it. And again, everyone that it is within the busing zones is eligible for the bus, but we just need that level of sign up with the bus company, and this will aid our work. There is a bus cleaning protocol. It's cleaned before and after each run. The drivers have if you go to the Cosmescus website, they have a training video on there in terms of what the bus drivers do and how they're supposed to train it and clean the buses. Cosmescus has been incredible to work with in terms of their flexibility and their adaptability and their investment in the safety of our students on their buses. They're also investing in the buses, what we call a fogging system, and the fogging system uses a product called Effersan, and it's approved by the EPA. And Effersan is a effervescent tablet that would be put into a device that would spray the buses down, between the bus runs. Works it quickly, and then there's an exhaust system, so it pulls all the chemicals out of the bus, and it's a fast and efficient way to clean multiple buses in the course of a day between runs. And so that's something that they're continuing to work on and develop, but we expect it to be in place by the start of the school year. So the elementary programming, in terms of what we're examining, again, you'll see similar language around here about a purposeful entry to the building, around community building routines and building routines and rapport. We have a big push with our elementary schools around making mask wearing fun, and this will be a campaign that we'll start to see probably from the Agency of Education across the state about how are we making wearing masks fun. This wants to get rid of some of the stigma around potentially wearing masks. We'll be asking parents as well to start practicing now. We've had some questions from families about what can we do. The best thing that we can do if you are at home with your children, start wearing the masks now. Let's build up that tolerance with our students. And that's something that everyone can do, and then get used to the idea of wearing a mask. All students will be remote on Wednesday, and we'll continue to reassess this. We'll look at the schedule that we have at the end of September and review it regularly to determine the feasibility of bringing in more students. Remember, a lot of this is adjusting to new norms and routines, and many of our students are not going to be familiar with what those have to be. We also have some challenges around space in many of our classrooms, and we want to make sure that we are following the right social distancing protocols and guidelines as they come up to us, and continue to adjust and react and adapt to those guidelines as they're presented to us. So our secondary schools, again, similar language, purposeful entry to the building in the use of our time around community building, routines, and rapport. The secondary schools have done a tremendous amount of work around trauma-informed practices, and that should be evident in the work that they're doing, and they are developing cohort models based upon their building needs. And all students, again, will be remote on Wednesday with a semester-long commitment. And the semester-long commitment around that has to do with the dynamics of scheduling and class load. And so we want that level of commitment to be within their model. That would allow those, the high school students in particular, to gain credit for those classes. And so we want to think about the decisions we make, not causing an unintended consequence of someone losing credit or creating a scenario where they may not be ready to earn credit in a different class if they were to move in mid-semester or later in the time. So we do want to see that level of a commitment. And the remote aspect of things, again, the language was given to us on the 15th, and we have a range of options. And so the commitment required for remote learning, really at the elementary level, we're looking on, will be evaluated based upon the guiding health recommendations in terms of space in the school, and the commitment for families at the secondary level would really be on a semester by semester basis. Our continuity of learning, and one of the questions that came up several times in many of the forums is that, well, remote learning didn't work for me. It didn't work. Our continuity of learning team, and that's led by our curriculum team, as well as several of our coaches and many of our staff members are on that continuity of learning team, and it's broken down into different groups, is looking at those questions specifically and looking at the feedback that they gained from all of the different schools. We know that we need a greater degree of predictability, routine, and rigor. And when we think about remote learning, the design last in the spring was amazing. And I think that it's really crucial and critical to recognize that our teachers turned on a dime and our schools turned on a dime to implement this level of remote learning. And we got stuck and we didn't have the time to plan it out purposefully. And there was a tremendous amount of professional development time that was put into place during the end of the school year and as the school year was wrapping up. But we were still operating in this remote kind of crisis-driven manner. The work with this current remote framework would really be more purposeful, have a greater degree of scheduling and predictability. Having teachers Zoom with students at 5:30 in the morning and again at 9 o'clock at night really isn't sustainable for students or staff alike, and we want to make sure we're respecting that. But we also know that our students do better when things are predictable and routine. And so that would be embedded in any of the remote learning options that are developed. And we want to make sure it is connected, instructed by a certified teacher. We're still working on what the classroom teacher will be. And this is work that came out of our conversation today as a leadership team of how those items will be staffed. In some cases, it may be connected to a staff member, but it's not also reasonable or feasible or sustainable to expect a teacher that's planning in-person instruction to also plan entirely for a cohort of students that's entirely remote. And so that's without support or some level of podding of those students. And so that may be evident in some schools, but in other places, I want to make sure that people realize that, a teacher is not going to have 15 remote learning students and 15 in-person students. That's, not a sustainable model or practical model for anyone's learning needs. So we issued a parent survey as of Sunday. As of this number has grown since then. It's over 17, almost 1,800 now. We administered a parent survey as of yesterday at 3 o'clock when I sat down to look at some of the results and pull much of this information together. We had 1,672 responses. Parents were asked to complete one survey per child and asked to identify the grade in the school. We use this as a screening method for further outreach regarding remote instruction and to get in a sense of what are we planning for and give us our best guess estimates in terms of what class sizes will look like. That information fed into the work that we did today. And when we examined the surveys, we also used it to determine the need for transportation. There was a question about transportation and who needs it and who could provide it. So the results, when we asked about who would want, in-person or what we call hybrid learning, but it's really the 2-day-a-week of in-person instruction. Just about 74% said they wanted to be in-person instruction, and almost 26% wanted fully remote instruction. Transportation-wise, we had a little bit of a different, we asked families who can provide transportation for their child. 83.3% said yes, they can provide transportation, and 16.7% said they cannot. And when we asked who would be willing to put their child on the bus, a little bit of a different result, but similar, kind of 68.2% said they're not willing to put their child on a socially distanced bus, and 31.8% said they are. So part of our planning around transportation is thinking about what's going to be the increased load and capacity of our roads around our schools to accommodate those. We've had some suggestions from our school leadership teams about staggering some of the times for those schools, as well as examining what are the impacts around the bus runs. So this information, along with the bus sign up and registration, will help us identify those bus runs to give us a better sense of timing and what's needed for schools. And then with our communications and outreach, we are going to bolster our website to continue to add more information to the website. I do have school messenger access now. I did get it, and I was, early on when I started, and I'm now able to actually fully utilize it. And so thankfully we have parent emails connected to our school messenger system, and school messenger is the robocall system that we use to communicate things en masse. And I will be sending out information via that to families. Communication will also be anything that's district specific. So things that will come across from a whole district perspective, whether that's great news or challenging news to hear, will come from the superintendent's office. And anything that comes from a school that's school specific, and that may be, further information from the school principals, that will come from the school principals. But there will be a distinct kind of dividing line where anything that has to come out going forward from the district level will come out of my office. And in terms of community outreach, we know that we have to speak with our local businesses. We know many of our families work for our local businesses and employers. We want to make sure that they're in the loop with the work that we're doing, and they have a sense of what may be need placed upon their staff so that we can all work together on this in this time of crisis. And we have identified a need to share our plan with school-age childcare providers. This delves into an area what we recognize that we have to do more work with and identifying things. So David, those are my questions. I'll stop sharing my screen now and I'll stop share here so we can address any questions. I know you said a few moments and I took more than a few.
Well, actually, you took as many as you needed, and we've been waiting a long time for this information. I know it's been an incredible amount of work. So let me just go over some of the expectations for how we're going to process this. What Andy just laid out is a very complex and detailed description of several months of work by dozens of people. And we've got now 178 participants, which is about 150 or 155 more than we usually have. And if everybody, or even if half of us want to speak, we're going to be here at least for 3 hours. So I would ask people to think about what it is they want to say before I start calling on people. If you have a really specific question, just focus on asking that question. I would like to have people stay within 2 minutes, and which means that a lot of background information, a lot of stories or previous experience, we're just not going to have time for that unless it's absolutely essential to understand the nature of your question or your comments. So again, try to keep it at 2 minutes. I will tell you when 2 minutes is up, and that would be a sign for you to make your point and then mute yourself. I also ask you everyone to, if you're not familiar with Zoom, on the bottom of your screen, if you get on with your mouse, you'll see an icon for participants. And if you click on that at the bottom of the column that you received, there's a little thing to raise your hand. And that's the way you will, that's the way I'll know you have a question. And I will call on people in the order that I asked, that I received the hands up. Again, I'll ask people to stay muted. Background music is very distracting, and we want to make sure the communications are really clear. And that's another reason to keep your questions clear and concise, because then you're more likely to get an accurate response to what you're really asking. So I just wanted to reemphasize what Andy indicated in the beginning, and that's that the focus of all of this is on the safety of our learners and on the adults who work with them to be able to provide meaningful education in a safe way. And so that's what the focus is. That's what it's going to continue to be. And before I open it up to the public, and as I said, we'll stay here as long as people have questions, or as long as I still have a quorum. But first I'd like to ask if any of the board members have specific questions or comments for Andy. This is also the first time that we have heard from this level of detail. So I wanted to give the board a chance if they had anything in particular. And I see Andy has his hand up right away.
Hey, David, just one quick question before we, oh, no, I just raised my hand again, sorry.
It's okay.
Before we start with the questions, I do want to just emphasize that our school leadership team has been working really around the clock on this. They've been emailing me all weekend long, and we've been in constant contact with things. I know many of them sacrificed family vacations and personal time. As we go into the night, if we go long, I just want to make sure that if our school leadership team, if you have to leave, I know I appreciate you being here. I understand your commitment to being here, but I want us to all recognize that in my sense, I want to just make clear that we're okay if our leadership team has to go. They've been at this since before 8 o'clock this morning with their level of work. So hats off to them for the great work that they've done on this, but I also want to make sure that we're being humane to their requirements today.
Thanks, Andy.
Yep.
I see Thomas Norland has a question for the board.
Yeah, so I just had it wasn't specifically for Andy, it's just for the board in general. I don't quite follow. Are we legally obligated by the state? I know the state is pushing for an opening now on the first week of September. Are we legally obligated to? Or is that our decision? Does anyone know?
We have not received a directive around pushing back the opening of schools yet, not that I know of. Given the sense that there was a question that came out as a one-question survey, and it wasn't just the Vermont Superintendents Association that was asked, it was other groups as well. I would imagine that we might see something like that. I mean, this is when we talk about plan for the unpredictable, these are some of those things we should plan for. And we'll continue to work around what's the best way for things to look at. If we do receive a date after Labor Day, we will have to look at some of the other dates within our calendar in terms of what professional development dates we have scheduled throughout the course of the year and what days off we have scheduled for students through the course of the year, because we already go late in terms of our end date for students and staff. We want to make sure we have some cushion within there anticipating winter weather. But nothing yet, Thomas.
Yeah, Thomas, I just add to that the limited guidance that came from the state was pretty much outlining the responsibility of having 175 student days and students at various levels engaged from 2 to 5.5 hours a day, and that hasn't changed. That's not different in terms of the emergency. So starting late would mean we would run later. My predecessor mentioned that the statute gives the school board the power to close a school if in an emergency. So if we find that it's August 30th and we're just not ready, we can postpone, we can hold off. I'm not sure, there may be some conflict with the agency over that, but if we feel like it's an emergency situation, that's our call.
So
Hopefully we'll be there.
sorry, I might have chosen my words incorrectly. I understand that we would be at one point forced to start the school year. I mean in-person learning. Are we being obliged legally to start in-person learning by the state?
The flexibility has been given there. I haven't seen anything that says you must start in person. I think that part of the guidance around that would be we would want to work in concert together between central office and the school board about a decision regarding that. But nothing has said you must start in person as of this point, not from the Agency of Education.
Thank you. Liz Adams?
Yeah, this isn't a question for Andy, but I was in contact with the Child Development Division today about are they doing anything around childcare issues. And I spoke with the licensor of the day, and she said that she thought that they were, but and looking at loosening restrictions, like for home-based care, can have 6 extra kids in the summer with another adult. So they were looking at that, but she said that the more people that call, the more pressure that is put on, the better. And I have the phone number for people to call if they'd like to add to the pressure for them to get moving on the childcare issue. And that number is 802-244-0837. And if you forget that, you can always find my school board email and I'll send it to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Michelle Green?
Hey, Andy.
Hi, Michelle.
Thanks for all of that. That was so much information in one place, and I think it probably answered a lot of questions that is going through everyone's mind. On the subject of childcare, that's like one of the biggest issues that every family, and I imagine our teachers, because so many of our teachers also our parents of school-age kids are facing. I guess I'm wondering, like, where is that on the radar of our plan making? Like one thing that keeps coming up is how we decide to create these cohorts and the ability to make sure that sibling days align so that, and this goes from high school to elementary because sometimes our high school kids are our babysitters, but to just coordinate those schedules. And there's a lot of families that have been bubbling together. They want to reduce exposure. They want to work together for carpooling, and they want to work together for childcare. And I feel like this would be one area. It would take a lot of extra effort. I know it's not an easy process, but being able to work with families to support them so that this works on their end too. Is there room for that?
So I'll tell you, we started we scheduled an hour-long meeting with the elementary principals last week. That turned into a 3.5-hour conversation, and it was almost entirely focused upon the issues of childcare. And the elementary principals across all the schools are such tremendous advocates for this need and to figure out what that is. So it's front and center on what, in terms of while childcare is not a school-based function, it's not really a district-based function, there's a reality around schools and the levels of supports we need to provide. The hard part in the area and across the country, this is a topic that's coming up in every single district in every single state, and it is front and center in the minds of the principals. And many of our principals know the needs within their families, and they've expressed a huge interest to help make this work and coordinate items. We know that if we do a simple sort from alpha names in terms of cohorts, for instance, we may need to be flexible on that so we can coordinate that level. I have some calls to continue to make, and just like we've talked about with the local businesses, making sure we reach out, we have to be able to identify who are the local school-age childcare providers to be able to find those spaces and ways we can support our families as well. That's a piece that's in development, but it is front and center. It's a big question that many of our families and staff have. And we know that I was in my former district dropping off some things and we heard that the local school districts that adjusted their schedule so that they were almost entirely remote for grades 3 and above. And that's creating havoc on their staff as well. And so we know that the decisions we make, we've got to be mindful of all those items because it's critical. So more to come on that.
Okay. I also wanted to ask, you briefly touched on what would basically be a response plan if when we see an exposure that's in our school.
Mhm.
Are we basically, is what I'm hearing then, that are we not expected to actually have any guidelines? It's kind of a wait and see when we get there and then turn to the health department at the time?
So we would refer to the Department of Health with any of those. So we are hiring a COVID coordinator that will help work out the finer points of those plans. Now, right now, the current guidance is really, follow the lead, and the decision-making authority from the Agency of Education has really been to place upon any sort of closures or mitigation plans on the superintendent to decide with feedback and information from the agency, from the Department of Health and local healthcare facilities. So that's there's not a hard and fast of we're going to shut the school down for 14 days. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. In some cases, it has been we'll close the room down for 24 hours before cleaning it, ventilate the classroom. But much of the language we've been seeing lately really doesn't require a full-blown shutdown of something unless there's a widespread outbreak.
Okay.
Thanks, Michelle. As Michelle mentioned, there was a lot of information that Andy gave us. I just want to remind people that this meeting is being recorded, and BCTV is pretty good about getting it up quickly. So maybe not tomorrow, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it tomorrow or the day after. So any other questions from board members? Yes, Tim Basiel.
Hi, Andy.
Hey, Tim.
We think of remote learning as the child being at home and in person, the child being in school. I was thinking about some families having lack of internet accessibility. I wonder if you discussed the possibility of remote learning in the schools where students can go to the school and access laptops at school and be taught actually from a teacher at home.
We haven't talked about the converse of the reverse of students going into the building with someone from home. It came up in small conversations, and in terms of when we look at kind of isolated incidents that is definitely something that's feasible and possible, we would look at. Again, this is all feedback that's helpful for us to think in our planning in terms of how we're apportioning staff. That we've heard information from parents wondering about, especially if with special education students or 504 students, they may need to be in more than 2 days a week because of their IEP needs. And we would want to look at how are we supporting those students as well. But that's a good suggestion, and we'll take it and bring it back to our team to think about what would this look like for students to come in for those remote purposes if we can limit their space and limit where they are.
Do you know how families are doing with internet accessibility in our district?
We have not done a recent survey. We can add that to our next survey to get a sense of what that is. I know connectivity is a challenge for our families, and putting that out there and getting a better statistic. I'll be honest, I saw an email about connectivity came through today, and I have not gotten a chance to look at it yet.
And just one more point, if I may.
Yes.
There was an article, which I'd be glad to send to you, that there's a smell test, which is some say is more reliable than the temperature test.
Excellent. Please send it to me. That would be, we can share it with our COVID people.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Any other questions from the board? Okay, just a reminder to, I'm going to start calling on people. Please be ready with your question. Please unmute yourself and then mute when you're finished with your question. And again, try to be as succinct as possible. Tara Castine and then Beth Bristol.
Thanks, David. This is Tara Castine in Putney, And I have two questions. One is riding off of Michelle's comments regarding an action plan. As an essential worker, it's so important for parents to know, even if it changes throughout the year or throughout the month, what's going to happen if one of the children within our cohort or pods becomes sick, one of their brothers or sisters becomes sick, one of their family members becomes sick. What is the protocol for, okay, that one kid doesn't come to school, but what does it mean for the other 9 kids that were in that pod? Do they all not come to school? So I know it's still early, but really think about having that plan put out there for parents is so important. Second of all, I have an IEP and a 504 plan in my family, and I have received actually no communication regarding how those will be handled in the coming year if we choose in person 2 days, 3 days, or the complete remote learning. And this is concerning to me as a parent with those plans in place, is how do I make an informed decision for my kids when I have no information coming to me on how those will be handled. I had one kid that really thrived in the home learning situation and one that didn't. And so just understanding how those will be met if we choose the different ways is something that I'm very interested in learning more about and didn't really hear anything in that
Thanks, Tara.
presentation about.
Thanks.
Thank
So
you.
Tara, those are great questions. You know, one, any sort of a response plan would be, you know, as we have it, will be caught up in our health and safety guidance in terms of our reopening plan. I'll mention that reopening plan, once it's done, will be on our website. It'll be shared as a living draft, meaning that information as we receive it, as it develops, will be updated in that plan frequently. So it's not as if something that we publish it, forget it, put it on a shelf and move on from it. It'll be a document that should be with us throughout the course of the year and through the end of this pandemic crisis. In terms of special education, you know, and it's in the same venue and same kind of context with other things that have come along, that the guidance that we've received has been minimal at best with these things. And I'm not trying to deflect or, you know, it's an absolutely correct, you know, assessment of where we are right now. We are still awaiting final information regarding the start of the school year from, you know, special education. You know, and that should be coming out from the Agency of Education at the latter part of this week or next week. And that will continue to help our planning efforts. So there's more information to come about that, and it's unfortunate that it wasn't all released at one time. But these are, as you've seen, if you've heard, these are the things that we try to work with and adapt as information becomes available to us.
Hey,
Thanks,
Andy,
Tara.
can I just jump in real quick?
That's right.
Real quick.
Okay, Tara, this is Shelley Wilson. I'm the special ed director for the district. I took over July 1 from Marisa Duncan-Holly, our former director. I just wanted to echo Andy's sentiment and to also say that student IEPs and also 504 plans don't go away because of the pandemic. And your child's unique learning needs, we need to work to meet those needs within this environment, whether you choose a remote learning option or a hybrid option for your kiddo. So our special educators are coming up with some really creative solutions as to how to deliver service to each individual child. And I think as our plans for what the options look like come together at the general education level, and hopefully with more guidance from the Agency of Education around the specifics for IEP service delivery, hopefully we will have some more hard and fast answers for you. But also please feel free to reach out to me or Liz Dimmick, who I think is here at this meeting. She's the elementary level coordinator, and either of you are happy to speak with you about your specific questions.
Great. Thank you, Shelley. Beth Bristol and then Ellen Tulovikis.
Thanks, Dave. Good evening. First off, thank you, Andy, for this information. It's really helpful. My question is specific to the survey results and whether you have and can share the results from the school building level. And if there was any school or schools that varied significantly in their results from the combined survey results, and if any of those would prompt you to consider or have to consider alternatives to the proposed options due to staffing needs.
Yeah, Beth, I will say that staffing is one of our biggest drivers in the work that we're doing and completing, and making sure that it's one of the biggest concerns. I will say that, you know, some of the models that we look at will be driven by staffing. There was some variability in general. It was, you know, in one of our elementary schools had a high degree of desire for in-person instruction, whereas another one had a higher degree for remote learning. Generally, they all kind of fell within, you know, because they're small sample sizes. So, you know, a couple family, you know, we have to remember that, you know, within a school of 150 or 200, you could get, you know, 5 or 10 people have a significant impact on shifting that balance from one direction to the other. So it's not like we were surveying 200,000 people, you know, for something else of this sort. So the percentages ranged. We did break them down. I don't have them on hand right now to kind of share school by school, but we did break them down, and those numbers, you know, kind of are helping inform our anticipated needs. Paul Smith, who's one of our curriculum and assessment coordinators, really did a nice breakdown with that, and perhaps we can share that at some point if we can find a way to do so without compromising the confidentiality of our families.
Thank you.
See, Ellen Tumavikas and then Mike Zostak.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I had a question about testing. I'm curious how testing will be approached. Will children and staff be expected to come in the beginning of the year with a negative COVID test? And then will there be testing throughout the year? How will that be approached? Thank you so much.
Thank you. There's currently no directive to test people ahead of time, and I understand where this, you know, so I'm a parent of 2 college students, and they're both working on their COVID test and scheduling those COVID tests. We do not have any anticipated plans to schedule any COVID testing for staff or students prior to reopening schools. I think colleges and universities are focusing, they have a little bit of a different infrastructure to do those things and directive to do those things. But as of right now, there's no directive to do any of that level testing. Should that change, we would have to receive guidance most likely from the Department of Health on that as a directive, but currently there's no guidance to do that.
Can I respond?
Yeah, go ahead.
The second question, without the directive, would we ever think, I know some other local schools will be doing that as well, and granted, they're not public schools, but without the directive, would we ever just think, hey, that sounds like a really sound idea and we're going to do that? Since it sounds like the governor has given quite a bit of leeway for each superintendent to handle their own district. Just curious.
That would be a conversation we would hold in conjunction with the school board about making policy around what would be the implications for that, for a positive or negative test. But that would really be something a conversation we would hold with our COVID coordinators and done in conjunction with the school board to make that decision. I think it's a longer conversation. Given the implications of it, I think we would want to have extensive public input regarding that determination to do so. And so I would defer to the board to have that further conversation to make that determination.
Thank you. Mike Zostek and then Amir Flesher.
Thank you, Andy. I'm impressed with the amount of work that everyone's been doing. I believe we said that our reopening efforts, that our efforts regarding anti-racism that we put forth would be handled on an equal priority basis with our reopening efforts. And I noticed that it seems like just following emails, there's a lot of hiring that's been done. So my question is, have we hired people in this hiring so far? Have we hired people, BIPOC people, people of color, and so on?
So the hiring has been done by we're all postings that were created prior to with the exception of the 2 COVID coordinators, and those were individuals that were appointed through our existing nursing pool to use as a stipended spot. So any of the hires that had occurred were all postings that were created prior to the district's anti-racism platform that was occurred. I do not know in terms if we have hired any BIPOC individuals from that list. I would have to defer to the principals in terms of who they had hired, because I haven't met those individuals yet. So they were people that were interviewed and had final interviews prior to me coming on board, or some things that have been kind of wrapped up once I was on board.
Just to comment, Mike, a little more broadly on that topic. Andy has been in touch with a group from Connecticut that is putting together a proposal. We'll be meeting with them to hear about how they would recommend we move forward with the 90-day plan. And we've also been contacted by somebody from the human rights services from the state. And actually, I'll ask Thomas to talk a little bit about that if he'd like to. We just heard from them today to do. So there's planning going on. There's information being shared, and people are being contacted to keep this moving. And so it's not just in the hiring area, but in the whole 90-day plan for all 8 points of the commitment. Thomas, do you care to address that?
Yeah, so today's diversity meeting, which was at 4:30 right before this. The main point today is every diversity committee meeting that we have in the next coming months, each one is going to focus on at least implementing one of the steps from the anti-racist commitment. And today we were focusing on the education of board members, administration, and possibly teachers as well. And we invited somebody who Andy had recommended, Bor Yang, and she went over a possible training session that the board can go through. So that was today, and then next month we'll at least handle another one of them. So we are definitely actively working on it.
Thanks, Thomas.
I just want to make the comment that it's really, we talk about social emotional needs of our students. It's really critical that we make an effort to bring in people of teachers, counselors, administrators of color into our schools. And it's even more critical than it probably was in the past because of what's happened with COVID. So it really needs to be put on the front burner.
Well, and Mike, just so I can say, hiring was our other focus for the meeting today, going over specific ideas of how to get people to apply who are people of color, and what we can do, if we can offer any incentives. Obviously, going outside of the Vermont area is a necessity, and certain amounts that we have to have as a goal of at least hitting soon. So we're working on that as well.
Thanks, Thomas. Amir Fletcher.
Hello, thanks so much. My question is around being outside. Everything that I've heard is that transmission of COVID is greatly reduced when you're outside. There was a long article about it in VT Digger today, and I actually work in one of the schools, and I don't have a lot of expertise in like outdoor education, a little tiny bit. And I'm wondering if we're thinking about engaging professionals who have expertise in the area of outdoor education to maximize the effectiveness of our time outdoors, and to make sure it's organized and safe and hopefully rich and as a learning experience as well. Thanks.
So thanks, Amir. That's a great question. So our outdoor, we're fortunate that many of our schools have just robust outdoor spaces. And so we are working with our schools to make sure that they're identifying opportunities for place-based instruction outside of the school. So we know that the outdoors provide us two opportunities. One, if physically distanced, it gives students an opportunity to have their mask off their face. You know, even at recess, students can have their mask off their face, but it has to be close by in case someone else comes near them. And so being outdoors gives students that level of a break, especially when they're back to school for the first time and we're not really too sure what the fall in terms of weather may look like. The schools have an incredible amount of outdoor space that's available to them. Even in our Brattleboro town schools, the schools are set up so that they can find ways to do things. They've worked with BEAC, and there's another Vermont Outdoor Education Group. So BEAC is the Bonneville Environmental Education Center. And they've been working with BEAC on that. As you know, Guilford has an incredible outdoor area. So does Dummerston and Putney, and Vernon has a wide campus as well. So there's been an emphasis on what can we do around professional development at place-based education or kind of outdoor, purposeful use of the outdoor spaces. It's not to imply that we're going to take the rolling whiteboard out and we're going to have a similar lesson, but outdoor learning will be different from things.
Andy, I was just listening to a program today with a superintendent and somebody who did a bunch of study on space and making space safe. And they talked about how during the intensity of the COVID outbreak, the hospitals had tents in parking lots, in the alleys. They had spaces all over the community, anywhere that there was a space. Have we been looking into securing tents and other structures for inclement weather?
Many of our schools have purchased tents for the outside, especially in the hotter months when they need some sort of level of sun protection. So many of the schools have already looked into doing some of those items. Yes.
Robin Morgan and then Deb Cardane.
Dave, I wanted to ask, this is sort of a companion question, I guess, to Amir's one. If we could hear a little bit about what is planned for the remote only option, because from the only things that I know about it so far is that it's going to be the students won't be part of any classroom. They're not going to be part of their school community anymore. And that it's going to be different than last year, looking at a 9 to 3, some sort of structure. And I'm just having a hard time reconciling how that fits with the stated emphasis on social emotional learning and community building and all that. What will that look like for the remote learners?
So we've talked as a group today, and we're still trying to identify how we can find educators within each school to work with each remote cohort of students. The biggest driver in this is staffing, and our capacity to be able to staff these situations and settings. So trying to find ways, I think that, depending upon the school, there may be some creative ways to address that need as we're looking at things. And so we'd like to, establish the floor of what would be the basic expectations for things, but then continue to see what we can develop beyond that. I can defer to Deb. Deb and Paul have been leading the continuity, or Deb's been on the continuity of learning team that has been talking about that. And so when we think of remote learning, when we think of the instruction for next year, it kind of goes into 2 categories. There's one, what does the in-person learning look like? 2, there's the remote learning, and what does that look like? And then for the in-person teachers as well, there is how are we maintaining a remote readiness if in the event the schools or a school has to shut down for a period of time. But Deb, do you want to share anything that you've worked on with the team about remote learning?
Sure, and I was actually raising my hand to answer a piece of Amir's question as well. So we are still working it out. What I can say is that we've learned a lot from the spring. So Robin, heading into the fall, we spent a lot of time at the end of the year reflecting what worked, what didn't work, what enabled us to have solid communication and connections with our students. And taking those methods and really putting them together, all teachers together, to create something that holds that front and center. When we talk about a structure, it's more along the lines of really developing routines that and using, at least with the hybrid model, we're hoping to use our in-person time to establish really a solid level of independence for our kids. And that, self-awareness and self-management are a big piece of social emotional learning. So we really want to hold building our kids' abilities to manage themselves as learners and spark their creativity and spark their excitement in their learning as front and center, which, quite honestly, many of our teachers did an amazing job with. But like Andy said, turning on a dime, we were learning as we were doing. So we're really hopeful to be able to put some of that into practice. As far as what it looks like, where there is guidance from the state from late in the season last year. So it will look like a little more, perhaps more synchronous time, which is, like real-time learning with teachers. One-to-one has been found to be much more effective in the instructional method, and then giving kids independent times to practice and independent projects. And we're going to be our professional development, and Amir, this gets at the question you were asking. We're going to be pulling some, the basic tenets of project-based learning, and really looking at what is it that we need to do to get our kids excited to learn so that they are sparked to learn independently. Outdoor ed, Amir, we have a little side project going on with Vermont Wilderness School and Beak, and we're going to pull Antioch in. And so you'll be getting some things, staff will be getting some things, previewing across August as early as we can, actually, to start some of that professional development working. But the community organizations are really excited to work with us, and we're excited to work with them as well.
Deb, quick question. Have you been looking into finding, along the lines of what Mike Zostek talked about, have you been looking at trying to find counselors to come into the building, people of color who can help with that social emotional adjustment?
No. Counselors, we have, our counselors are hard at work. They are.
Yeah, I know, but and I know you're going to be having, but if it's going to be a 6-week focus, is there going to be much individual focus on kids, or is it going to be more like group and activities that are designed to stabilize things?
Oh, it will be a combination. It will be a combination, the balanced combination. Kids working one-on-one with teachers, in groups for community building activities. Is that what you're asking? I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, and I'm just, there are people who support schools, particularly around racial issues and conflicts. And if it might be a wise idea to consider contracting with them to be available to help in the process wherever that might be needed.
Yeah,
in terms of having some people of color in the building in a meaningful relationship with kids.
Absolutely.
Available for that.
Yes, I fully agree.
I'll send you some names.
Beautiful.
Okay. Let's see, Molly Stoner and then Stephanie Bonin.
Thanks, David. And so many thanks to you, Andy, and the whole leadership team. I know you guys have been working about 15 hours a day, so really appreciate it. And I enjoyed seeing the results of the family survey, Andy. And I'm also aware that here tonight we have a lot of teachers and WSEA members. And I just was curious what your plans are for sharing the staff survey results, and specifically wondered if you made any progress in thinking about what would happen if teachers are asked to quarantine. And quite a few members have expressed concern about whether they'd be asked or required to use accrued sick days. And I'm wondering if that's a place for relief dollars. I don't really know the protocols for using those funds, but those are my questions.
So there's information that we're expecting. I know VISBIT is doing some policy work around what is the intersection between the FFCRA, which is like the Family First COVID Relief Act, FMLA, ADA. There are a handful of different things that are all in the works. And so we're expecting some kind of boilerplate policy language that would come out of that in terms of how we're looking at time and staff allocation of time, or what to do when people can't show up to work. We'll continue to consult with the district attorney, Pedro Lynn, and his wife around those items that as they would pertain to employment and employment law. And you had another question with that too that I wanted to answer. I'll be honest.
No, just the first part was if you had a plan to share the staff results.
So yeah,
today?
So my initial thought was I was going to share some of the results, but I'll be honest right now that there's a significant amount of anxiety and angst among our teaching population nationwide, and I'm concerned that there has been this shift in perspective around the hard work that teachers have done. And so while we elevated teachers in the springtime collectively on a national platform of the great work that they did in moving towards this level of remote learning, I am concerned about any sort of information that may portray teachers as not wanting to be in for all the, anything that might portray teachers in any sort of a negative light. And, we know that there's a great degree of discomfort about returning to work. And to some extent, we've got to learn to be comfortable with our discomfort, which is hard to do. And without, taken out of context, I'm worried that any sort of survey results around teacher preferences or options might be something that might be turned against us. And so, which was reason why I didn't want to necessarily share that information.
Can I ask a quick little follow-up?
Yes, go ahead, Molly.
Is there a plan to share it with teachers or with WSEA and the broader executive committee? Or
Yeah, so I have a call with Peggy tomorrow morning, and she's been doing some of the WSEA work. I'll share some of those results with her around those items. She has some of those same questions that you have that we'll be talking about in terms of where are things with policy language and things of this sort around employment law.
Okay, so Peggy is my contact person there?
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Molly. Stephanie and then Julie Ackerman-Hovis.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for spending this Monday night together. I have a question around outdoor education. And one piece is if you're choosing the remote option, is there any third option where there is some interaction outdoors for those kids with their cohort? And then the second is, Amir brought up outdoor education, and the answer was that we have a lot of outdoor spaces, but I also know that it takes money to change outdoor spaces into learning spaces. And I'm wondering if there's any money being given to the schools in order to do that, and if us as parents will know if that is going to be an option for our kids.
So I'll try to answer quickly because I know we're running long on time here with the questions. So one, I want to, so the priority for students is to have students in school for in-person learning. That's been kind of the stated priority. To the level for kind of the remote learning is really where, remote learning is done with the kind of understanding and was really the kind of the mindset that there's some inability for that child or family members to be in-person instruction. So whether there was a discomfort or a health condition or immune compromised member in the home or some worry about that. And those were the options around that. So so there have really been no plans to bring any of those students that are in a remote setting onto the campus, really with the understanding that there's a reason why they're remote. And so to limit that level of arrival on the campus and to prevent the development of another contact tracing group that we would have to do. Those, for families that are kind of on the fence with things, there is that kind of 2-day a week, as we're rolling out the school year, to have them in that for that. So the money that there is some CRF money, Corona or COVID relief funds available for some of the work. I know some of the principals have been in contact with Frank Rucker, who's our business manager, and I will say probably the best business manager in the state. I've been talking about how we can, utilize some of those Corona relief funds to develop and augment their outdoor learning spaces.
Julie and then Zara DeZolio.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Andy. I'm a teacher and a mom of 4 kids in the school district, and one of my kids I adopted from the foster system in Brattleboro. Last year, one of my biggest worries for my students when we went remote was that we were trying so hard to consistently reach our students and our families, but there were inevitably families with whom we could only have patchy communication, or who really would not call us at all. And I'm talking about as a whole school team. And we have wonderful counselors. I know all the counselors in the Brattleboro elementary schools are wonderful, and they were working so hard to make sure that they could get everybody to reach them. But it's a real concern when we're doing distance learning, whether it's 2 days a week or 5 days a week, to make sure that our kids are all safe. When they're in school, we can have eyes on them, and when they're not, we can't. And some of them we already have trouble with getting to school on a regular basis. So I can only imagine going 2 days a week might, lower their attendance. And I don't know if they'll show up. So I'm wondering if there has been thought put into in these unique times, a district-wide sort of plan for families who can't be reached, because the truth is we're not in a situation that we would normally be in with families. And I know that this has been a problem at not just my school, but other schools. So is there a policy, is there thought going into a plan for keeping kids safe in these remote times?
So I'll say in general, attendance is students are required to be in school, and in each school system has its own attendance protocols. I have not gotten down to that granular level yet of looking at what are the unique attendance protocols and policies, but we are beholden to following those guidelines set forth about attendance within schools. And so the level of notification of families, the contact, the outreach, a lot of those things that are already in place should be enacted. I will say that the state is probably overwhelmed in terms of the number of affidavit requests that have been submitted to it regarding attendance. Through the springtime, there was a level at which we received guidance that they were no longer accepting affidavits regarding attendance unless there was already a plan put in place. Much of this kind of always works upon it starts within the classroom level of we're noticing an attendance concern. We've got this outreach. I'm not hearing this. It's a teacher to principal or counselor conversation over let's try to do these things. Can we do a home visit? Can we have an outreach? So I don't know if there's the need necessarily to outline specifically in terms of our planning related to COVID. Is there anything different around attendance work? More so than how are we doing with our existing policies that are already in place for re-engaging families that might not be present or connecting to school. And those are things that we would expect to see in all buildings.
Thank you. Zara and then Liz Adams.
Hi, thanks. So I am not clear on the difference between the online offerings for hybrid options and the 100% remote. I heard Deb speak a little bit about both of them, but I feel like as a parent who is trying to decide, I need to know really specifically how those two separate streams of online learning are going to be different and the same. I've been hearing over the last couple of weeks.
Zara, can we get an answer to your question?
And I have another point.
Okay.
I'm really concerned about prioritizing in-person is going to create an inequitable situation for those who are going to opt for remote only. Thank you.
Okay.
So one, the prioritization of in-person learning, that's been a kind of the guidance from the Agency of Education. And we also received another communique from the Vermont Academy of the Vermont branch of the American Academy of Pediatrics, who have really also stressed the need for in-person learning, especially at the younger grades. I think that really the distinction between the remote, and I think Deb clarified some of those items. The remote aspect of the in-person learning, we have to remember that, as we said at the start of the presentation, we expect to revisit the protocols and procedures, in terms of trying to bring more students back into the building as the year progresses, and not to have this be an entire plan for the year if possible. I think that the principals and teachers also recognize the need to have that level of in-person instruction with students. And so while we're providing that remote avenue for students to complement their in-person learning time, that's being done around what's being done in conjunction within the class. Some of the models may differ from school to school based upon staffing, whereas the remote aspect of learning will be more consistent around those elements that Deb really pointed out to, but consistent from building to building.
Zara, is that helpful?
I'm sorry, it's still not enough information for me, but
If you want to think about it and maybe clarify what the question is, just put your hand up again and we'll see if we can get more information.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Liz Adams and then Chelsea Wheel.
Yeah, Andy, for families that choose remote learning, how many hours are you anticipating that they'll be online a day?
I think the guidance I would look to the guidance, that was distributed last spring around amount of contact hours that students would have in the course of their day in terms of what are best practices and screen time. That doesn't mean that that's the end of the learning time for the day. And so there may be reading expectation, there may be some outdoor activity expectations, there may be some kind of place-based learning expectations where they're engaging in some sort of project outside of the house. So that while the day might mirror that of a school day, their expectation isn't that they're going to be in front of the computer screen for 6 hours a day with someone talking to them for 6 hours straight. I think that would be difficult for teacher and student alike.
I see Deb Cardane has her hand up. I hope she's going to shed some light on this question.
David, I also had another question.
Okay, can you wait till
Sure.
Deb's response? Thanks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify what the way we're thinking about it is really academic commitment. So for a student, that could look like a combination of meeting with a teacher one-on-one in the morning to get them set up to go. This would be a remote portrait. Then they might go off and log in and do an assignment on their computer. Then they might have they would hold a menu, and they might then have a video that they might watch. Then they might go outside, and there might be a guidance on something they might do in that way. But the academic commitment that I was looking for the document that we're just now working on. We do have minutes based from the state. It's like, you're looking at 90 for like K-2, 90 minutes a day of academic commitment. And then lots of choice outside of that.
Thanks, Deb.
Okay.
Liz?
Let's see. So for the fully remote kids, is there going to be social time built into their online time? Yes.
Yeah, there would be some level of a morning meeting and connection time where they would do it virtually.
Yeah. Okay. And I think I already know the answer to this, but if somebody starts off with the hybrid and then the parent doesn't feel particularly safe for whatever their health reasons are, can they then switch to remote, or do you have to pick one for?
I think we've talked about anticipating some degree of movement back and forth. We'd like things to be relatively consistent for the purpose of contact. So it's easier to go from classroom to remote instruction than it is from remote instruction into the classroom. The opposite's a little more difficult, but going from classroom to remote, we would anticipate some level of movement with that.
Great. Michelle Green?
On this topic of remote learning, as far as the kids doing hybrid and their remote days, is that going to be similar, or will it be a more condensed situation? I know there's parents that are worried their kid's going to be in childcare, and then in the evenings they're going to have to do a day of school still. Will it be different than what we're hearing you describe?
It'll be different than what it was last spring. And so that's one of the things that in this emergency remote, people were doing. They were accessing classrooms and logging in whenever they could. So it'll be different. Each of the schools is working out based upon some of the unique staffing needs and capacity at each building, what that will look like. But we anticipated to have a similar format of a day where the day starts at a distinct time and ends at a time where there's connection with adult. There may be some independent practice. There may be some enrichment opportunities. as I've said before, we're still kind of working out the best way we can infuse the specials, the unified arts and exploratory topics into a student's day, and the best way to do that. So those are all things that are being worked out. The elementary principals in particular, well, all the principals had some great ideas today in terms of what their days will look like. The elementary principals have some solutions to that, and they differ a little bit building by building because of the staffing capacity they have at each space.
Okay. So, well, I'm sorry, but so if parents are working right now on childcare issues, it sounds like if there's going to be a bit of a schedule, then they need to find childcare options that can support their child's remote learning school day for the hybrid kids.
I would say for both, we're trying to have as much of a consistent day as possible.
Okay.
Thanks. Chelsea, I'm sorry, I skipped over you. And after Chelsea, Krista Gaijin.
Thank you so much. So my question is, as a teacher who is also a parent of a school-age child, and when we talk about employers and businesses being flexible to accommodate the needs of parents, I'm wondering how the board and the superintendent and just how we as a district are framing that flexibility as employers for our teachers who are going to need that same level of flexibility.
I think, Chelsea, that's, continues to be on a school by school basis in terms of what our capacity is. I will say, I echo the same concerns that Bridget Neese did around being able to staff all our schools. And so we have to have a great degree of flexibility when possible and feasible. I will say that the school leaders were particularly adamant in this regard around the degree of flexibility needed for employees and trying to be as creative as possible and finding solutions for things, especially for our elementary faculty that are really needed in the classroom and we not have this, and their distinct needs with having students within the building.
And then if I could just follow up, my second part would be if there is going to be some sort of limits on leaves of absence, FMLA, or other ways that teachers who may just reasonably not be able to work when their children are in more days than or you understand what I'm saying, in school, fewer days than teachers are required to work, if the flexibility isn't meeting us where we need, thinking about that teacher survey, what are we planning for teachers who can't work? And how are we filling those positions, much like substitutes?
So as I said, VSBIT is working on some kind of boilerplate policy language around what that would look like in terms of FMLA, ADA, FFCRA, and what are the implications for school districts and boards of education in that decision-making line of reasoning. And so I'm hoping that we get that sooner rather than later to help us with that guidance. I think we've got to solidify the model to share with our and land upon something, and we hopefully will land upon what the scheduling pieces look like and the individual flexibility from building to building happens to be. I'm hoping we can land on something by the end of this week so that we can share that with staff so that we can start to plan adequately. I will say again, it's a concern around staffing the buildings, and we've shared that in a number of different forums that we have to be able to staff the buildings to be open. And so that degree of flexibility and pragmatics was discussed today as well.
Thanks. Krista, and then Robin Morgan.
Hi, Andy. I'm also interested in hearing more about how students with disabilities will be supported next year. I appreciate that the guidance hasn't come out yet from the state and that educators are working really hard to find creative approaches to meet student needs. However, I'm wondering how you're seeking input from families who have children with IEPs or 504s regarding their questions and worries. I'm curious whether special education supports will be based on what is offered to general ed students or more individualized. And I am worried that some families are, the idea that they should contact special ed administration or their principals, some feel a little intimidated to do that and may feel more comfortable with a survey or some other way to give input.
I think I would defer to, so I know it's hard to reach out to Shelley to answer the questions. Shelley is probably one of the most approachable people in special education that you can meet. We have not necessarily, if we had any forums, if we get to the point, we would have Shelley with us around, ideas for special education. It is, again, language that's forthcoming, like Shelley said earlier, the 504 and IEP document are documents that are legally binding. They're things, that services that we're beholden to offering. And it goes with the student with whether they're in person or they are remote in terms of the level of service and needs they have and accommodations necessary so that students can meet their goals and objectives of the IEP. So in terms of the plans for that, we would probably look at it on a case-by-case basis with students in terms of where they are and what setting that they're in, and identify those necessary resources that are necessary for students to be successful. It does sound like once that guidance is out, we'll have more information for families to give a better picture. Without that guidance in terms of what the AOE is advocating, it's difficult to answer that question, but as soon as we get it, we'll probably have some more level of increased communication on that topic.
Do you follow up with a survey for families so that they can give their input and share what their questions are?
Yeah, we can do that.
Great. Let's see, Robin and then Tara Castine.
Hi. I just wanted to, I think this is a little bit of what Zara was getting at with her question about the remote learning option. And what I'm kind of still wondering is, it sounds like of course, our default thought is that school is best done in person. I think everyone agrees that. But from the statistics that you shared, Andy, it sounds like fully a quarter of this district wishes to stay at home and not go to in-person school. And I would love to have more information about exactly what that's going to look like. I was interested in choosing that for my own kids, but on my survey, I actually indicated in person because there was so little information about it. The remote option and what it would look like sounded really unpleasant. And I think that a lot of parents are having that concern. In fact, I'm hearing from a lot of people that they're thinking about withdrawing their kids from the district and self-homeschooling if they want to stay home. And I think that would be really terrible for our district funding wise, and with just sort of the loss of relationship that's so important to kids and families with their school. So I would just love to hear more about that option and more about how we're going to communicate more deeply with families about what it is going to be like.
Well, I think Deb has gone to length about what the remote options would tend to look like. As our team, the continuity of learning team, continues to meet within the next week. It's probably some additional information we can share with parents to provide some frameworks of what those days will look like in terms of the content interaction. A lot of these pieces are being staffed differently at each different grade level, and as our teams and our school leadership teams meet, we will have a better sense of how they're staffed, and that will also drive what the framework is. But our continuity of learning team should have something within the next week or two around a rough framework of what that remote learning would look like. And we can share that in our regular updates to families and post it on our website.
Andy, I've had a lot of communications about this over the last couple of weeks as well from parents who don't feel comfortable with their kids in school. They don't feel safe, but they'd like them to be able to be with other students at other times. And you mentioned creating a new cohort with having to do the contact tracing and all of that. I just would ask you to consider having your teams look into that again and see if there might be ways to make that workable. So those kids could participate in things like trips to BEAC or any of the other things that are outdoor activities that might be any sports or phys ed or things like that might be going on outside. I know it's a lot, it's more to add to what's going on, but it is a significant number of students, and the socialization is really important.
And some of the challenges around that, and just in full transparency, and getting back to some of the staffing questions, is that we are trying to, we do know we have some staff that are unable to work, and I've said my preference is that if we're going to staff remote sites, we would start first and foremost with those staff that are unable to work because of documented and verified medical reasons, that they would be at the core of that, and that way we're maintaining someone within our and helping staff that. And that might be the one wrinkle that would prevent something of that sort. But certainly something we'll continue to look at, and it's a good suggestion.
Or maybe to look at over time as well, once you
Yeah.
get a handle on how things are going based on, the current planning.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Tara and then Maggie Foley.
Hi, thanks again for taking my questions. This is Tara Castine from Putney. I have two additional things, and I would have commented in the chat, but it was disabled, so I apologize for taking up more time. Question is, I really think the school needs, after listening to the teacher and talk about kids who need to be in school for safety reasons or other things, has the school district thought of having one classroom per site that is a 5-day class with a mixed grade that would facilitate having kids be on site? Also, I hear a lot of discussion of people with childcare issues. If the remote learning is going to require someone during the day to help an 8 or a kindergarten first grader, second grader with remote learning, that is a big ask for a lot of parents who are working. So I would really like to make sure that that is in the thought process when you are sending stuff home with our children. Thank you.
Yep. In terms of your first question, I appreciate your comment on the second aspect of that. In terms of the first one, we haven't looked at a 5-day option for students. One, we're minimizing that level of contact tracing, and two, we are trying to remain, faithful to the idea that we're going to be doing a deep clean in the buildings on Wednesdays, and that's to maintain. Again, the part of this is minimizing the spread and recognizing that we're in a pandemic still, and it hasn't necessarily, it's been Vermont and the Northeast have done a great job because, in containing the spread. But this is also July 27th, and we haven't seen what's happening now as we're starting to see a resurgence in other areas of the world that had the virus under control. And so part of it is to maintain this level of what are we doing to make sure we're cleaning the facilities as frequently and as deeply as possible on a regular basis, and maintaining that ability to do contact tracing within small cohorts of students. Certainly the goal, as we said, should the numbers and data indicate, we will bring kids back, more groups back into school more often as possible.
Thank you. Maggie and then Jane Goodell.
Hey there, everybody. Maggie Foley, Guilford parent. I hope I did not miss the answer to this question earlier. I had to duck out for one 5-minute period. I am curious about the hybrid learning model, and my understanding that is if you sign up for the remote model, you'd essentially be put into, let's say, like a district-wide 5th grade with an assigned teacher is kind of how I'm envisioning it. And if you are in the hybrid model for your remote days, those 3 days a week, whether it's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, would you be put into the kind of district-wide remote pool, or would you stay with your in-classroom teacher knowing that they'd be teaching during those days and maybe be working on independent assignments? Do we have any kind of better sense of what that would look like for the hybrid children?
So we'll have an answer this week on what that looks like. Each school by school has its own unique capacity to do those things. The idea that we're trying to be, in terms of the remote option, families that choose it, we're trying to be careful and cognizant of our staffing capacity and how we can best meet the needs of the learners and make manageable groups, for instance, that have enough students within the group. That may involve some within the same school. It may involve some cross-school kind of groupings of students if necessary. We're trying to minimize that need to do so, but a lot of the staffing capacity that we have will dictate that. In regards to what they're doing on the day-to-day basis and the days when they're not in the building, that is an element that we've had some brainstorming around that we're not necessarily ready to share yet as a group, but we have some just different ideas around what that will look like in each building to try and maintain as much contact with that classroom teacher as possible.
Thank you. And this is not a question, but just a comment. I would just also add my voice to advocating for as much outdoor time as possible and allocating resources to make outdoor time possible for as many hours per day for those that choose the hybrid option. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jane and then Ann Beekman.
Hi. So as a teacher in the district and a parent, I'm just wondering what the timeline is for finalizing the who's going to be at school and who's not, and the class sizes and the classes, and if kids are Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday. For many reasons, it seems like the more time that we have to prepare, like the sooner we can take care of that, the better. So I just wondered if you had a date or an idea of.
Yeah, that came up today, and it's been coming up. We hope to have something done quickly. The rostering aspect of it has to go into Power School as well, and we're anticipating the roll-up, which doesn't really impact the elementaries as much as it does the high school. When the dates flip, it's like a giant Rube Goldberg machine, and all kinds of things get set into motion. So we're hoping to have those items within in a week to two, I would imagine, from our. And the elementaries we're still working on the distinct model in terms of what that looks like. There's some great plans that we're just going to really flesh out the final details. Everyone did phenomenal work today, all the different buildings to have what those would look like. And then we will look at the staffing capacity to do those things and share that with probably once class lists are set, what I would imagine would be either come out of central office or via individual principals. We'll have to figure out what makes the most sense.
So like 2 weeks-ish?
I would imagine within 2 weeks, people will start seeing class lists, if not sooner.
Thank you.
Yep.
Ann?
Thanks, Dave. Hi, Andy. I have a question regarding BUHS. Mr. Parent had sent an email home indicating that the all remote options that would be offered would be very basic core subjects. So for example, I'm aware that we are not offering AP English as a fully remote option. Are we considering if there is any possibility of offering a fully remote option for at least some electives, or creative writing as opposed to English B?
I think that we talked today, and one of the options. So the high school has some distinct challenges in terms of the sheer number of human beings in the campus. The whole BUHS, the whole BU6 campus, between the middle school, WRCC, and BUHS, has some distinct challenges around the numbers of people we're bringing together at one time and the age of those occupants. Some of the recent data that came out that pointed to those 9 to 18 are just as capable of carrying the virus as adults. So in thinking about that, the high school may have some different options and different flexibility. I would imagine, Steve is a reasonable human being. And if there were individuals, Steve, I hope I didn't hear you giggle there. But in terms of those individuals, we would look at what are some of those unique needs around AP classes. The College Board can be a little finicky about class environment, so we want to make sure we're not running afoul of them as well. I would guess, instead of just being a long-winded answer, I guess we would be able to look at those on a case-by-case basis for those things in terms of how they pop up and what the students' needs have to be.
Thank you.
Yep.
Jackie Reynolds?
Hi, thanks, David. Andy, thanks so much for everything. I've just been thinking about what Michelle mentioned earlier about families who are bubbling together and pooling resources for childcare and things of that nature. And, that's something that is already happening with many families because we need to do that in order to survive all of this. And I just think that if there's any possible way that we could try to coordinate the groups that kids are going to school in with groups that they are already existing in, that might be really important for managing the risk, because if you're going to be, with a group at school every day, if some of those kids could be a part of the group that you are already in, if there's a way to do that, just to to minimize your overall contact. I would love to see us look at that, just poll families and say, are there other families that you're bubbling with, that you're being around for childcare, and let's try to make that the same group they're in school with, if at all possible. And I realize that that is a big effort and undertaking, but I think it could, it could increase the safety factor of this entire endeavor. So I wanted to just mention it.
I think we would look at our first pass schedule and then identify what we can move around and make the most sense of things. It's a good thought. And I know our principals are eager to form their class lists so that they can make families aware. And then that will factor into what does it look like. I think that, from what I've met with the principals right now, they're an incredibly hardworking group that are there for their families and are passionate about meeting their families' needs. So I would imagine that that's a kind of a conversation that's willing to take place.
Jackie, did you have a follow-up? I saw I may have unmuted you or muted you or whatever.
No, just trying to manage the mute button. I'm good.
Okay, thank you. I'm not the only one, I guess. Bethany Ranquist?
Okay, I unmuted. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
I'm stress sewing right now, masks on my machine, so I had to push the button and make sure you couldn't hear the buzz of my machine. I have a couple of questions that I don't think I've heard the answer to, but so I just wanted to check, and if I did hear it or if I just missed it, feel free to yell at me. My first one is, I haven't heard, I don't think tonight, any updated information about what is going to happen as far as school meals and feeding kids goes for kids when they're in school, as well as those who are doing the remote learning and the hybrid, like what that is going to look like, what the delivery of it is going to look like, and how we're going to manage that, and if we're going to be continuing the breakfast and lunch for all students, how that might work. And then the other thing is, I'm just really, I work with kids, with groups of kids after school, and I'm really concerned about the teachers having to go back to their classrooms and at risk at a different level than they ever have had to before. And I know, Andy, you said that there was going to be one KN95 mask for each teacher, which by my understanding has basically like once or twice used for several hours and then starts to lose its integrity. So I'm just curious, like what other PPE options there are going to be for teachers, and also if there is conversation about hazard pay or any sort of increase in salary as a result of putting themselves at a far greater risk in their returning to work this year than they ever have had to do previously. I'm just curious if that has been considered at all, and if you could speak a bit to that, I'd appreciate it.
So the masks, I shared at the beginning of the presentation, Bethany, a list of the PPE that our health and safety team is procuring. So that was in addition to, so the KN and N95 masks were those that were donated or arranged by the Agency of Ed for all the schools in terms of some level of PPE, but then the health and safety team is also purchasing masks for teachers through the different COVID funds. We haven't discussed the issue of, and this would be a bargain piece, and so it's a kind of a labor topic around any of that hazard pay. That's something that's not been brought up or discussed, and would be an item that was. And I missed your third question that you had in there.
My final question was about the school meals and how that was going to work in terms of on-site, remote, and the hybrid learning. Like, how's that going to work as far as kids, making sure that kids are still being fed consistently throughout the.
So I have a meeting. I have a meeting tomorrow morning with Fresh Picks and our staff. I've asked John Sessions to also attend that meeting, and John was really point person in the district over the spring and summer for the meals allocation and meals distribution. So I've asked John to attend with me. And I believe Frank will also be there and others to get a sense of what can we do to make this happen. So to lay out what our framework's going to be, and then to figure out a way to meet, to provide meals to students and families. So it's that's in there. That's in part of the topic. We're still fleshing out the details on that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Michelle Green.
Andy, one of the questions on the parents survey was about how we can support families from a technological place. And I don't think that you shared any information that you gathered from there. And so I'm wondering if you could just talk about that for a minute. And also, are we budgeting to also support teachers and their technological needs, be it, whatever gear they have to work with or upgrading their home internet service or things like that?
We haven't looked at upgrading home internet services, although there were, I would defer to our tech group to get an answer on that long term in terms of what that looks like. So that was a long answer in terms of the parent survey. The needs ranged from, I need support with accessing this website, I have no connectivity, I need a Chromebook. Those were the types of the issues that it ranged anywhere from needing a device to needing connectivity. And someone to talk to when a program wouldn't work while people were at home. And so we'll look at those long answers and kind of parse them out for the different group. There were a number of them, and so we'll take a longer time to get a sense of what the bigger themes are around the larger, are there clusters of things that we're seeing, and then are we seeing clusters from certain areas differently than in other towns? So, for instance, in parts of Putney, are we seeing greater issues around connectivity versus we are in Brattleboro? I mean, looking at some of those items where service may not be as great, or down in Guilford in certain parts where there may be some lack of coverage. And so that's where those items where we haven't talked about how are we upgrading any of the staff technology other than, do people have access to using the tools at their disposal?
Those are a couple of things that the legislature spent a lot of time talking about and weren't able to really do as much as they wanted to because of the restrictions on the funds and the short time frame as far as increasing connectivity, running fiber to everybody that needs it. But they did put quite a bit of money into that, and it was for things like upgrading whatever we can do basically to improve connectivity. And the primary thing behind that, the primary driver of that was the equity issue. That if kids do not have access, they simply aren't going to. So that I'm not sure if we can contract with someone to provide those kinds of supports, or get somebody that's not directly trying to also run the schools at the same time to do that. But that's something that we didn't hear a lot about it tonight, but I have heard a lot about it in the last few weeks, and I know we will when people start to realize that there are students who, because of their affluence or where they live, are not able to have school, and maybe with health issues, are not able to come to school. They're not able to be educated. So that's going to be something that's going to draw our attention sooner or later. So it might be a good thing to try to look into sooner. Any other questions?
All right, I think we've had our
Michelle's back for one more.
Oh, I thought we had our John McCain moment, David.
No, not yet.
You can ask David what the John McCain moment is at some point.
Okay. Just the last thing. I haven't heard anything at all about what high school is going to look like. I know it's a totally different beast to slay. Outside of having cohorts 2 days a week and dividing kids down the middle, by the letter of their name, which has just created frantic upset everywhere. And some kids will be picking remote if there isn't flexibility there. I would just like to have a visual and a picture of what it's going to be like with kids moving from class to class. Are we staggering things? How much are they moving? There's just been very little information about how the high school is going to function that's been shared with families. Can you tell us a little bit?
We haven't talked, I haven't talked closely with Steve about the movement of students in the building because we've talked more about what the framework of learning looks like. And so when we think about the lens of, and so on a lot of the guidance, and even when we speak to the secretary, he may know that it's impractical sometimes to limit the movement of high school students within the building because, kids are taking different classes and at different cohorts because they have graduation requirements, so they're on certain pathways for their classes. They may have distinct needs. So the movement will be minimized. And Steve's talking, I see his hand is raised. He can probably explain it a little better than I can, but the idea is to think about boosting up that remote level capacity in terms of what do you do as a teacher in a remote environment. And then when you have the students in the classroom, you do a lot of those in-person work. And so it's more of kind of a flipped classroom model where the content delivery may be done remotely, and then the discussion and the Socratic seminars and that type of work would be done, in person. So Steve, you want to share some of that since I see your hand up?
Yep. Go ahead, Steve, and then Eli Gould.
Sure. So, we've given a lot of thought. We've had a lot of conversation, and Andy's right. We're trying to minimize movement. We're trying to minimize the number of transitions that everyone has during the day. So to that end, we are going to not have advisory or ACE period during this fall semester, because those are two more areas of transition. Instead, we're going to fold that time into the academics and carry out activities that would normally be held in advisory in a Block 3 class. So what that means is in each class, each day, we'll have between 10 and 12 students. And, we've talked a little bit about entry of students, how they come into the building. We're getting ready to discuss what happens for the students that, now that we have numbers, we know about how we have to staff the front of the building at the beginning of school and how we have to staff the bus loop as well. And so we'll have an opportunity, whatever point of contact model we follow, we'll be able to staff that in the morning in front of the school and behind the school. And then we've talked a lot about how do students go to lunch and what does that look like. Our lunches are going to be grab and go. We'll have a vegetarian option and we'll have a regular lunch option. But, we made the decision that we're not going to run a la carte items. We're going to try to have students get into the cafeteria and back out as quickly. And then at the end of the day, we spent some time talking about dismissal. What we likely do is probably dismiss students from the second floor and then the first floor in terms of students that are walking versus or driving. And we'll dismiss students that way, and we'll make sure that people aren't congregating outside after school as well. And then we'll likely, though this isn't set in stone yet, we'll likely hold students in classrooms until their buses are called, and we'll have them move directly to their bus, to try to minimize mixing as well. So really, we're trying really hard with bathrooms. We're going to probably assign certain classrooms to certain bathrooms. We will have directional movement in the hallways. We've been debating counterclockwise and clockwise ad nauseum, and which stairs are up and which stairs are down. And so we're going to finalize that. Michelle, did I hit everything? Is there anything in particular that's unclear?
No, that was a good overview. And I guess because we've talked a little bit about what these cohorts are going to look like, I'm wondering if there might be room, even if it was, case specific, presented to guidance counselors with parents support or something, to create flexibility. I know there's kids with emotional needs who don't really have any friends, and this is, how we're dividing them has been pretty harsh, but also the need for things like pairing children so that our teenagers can babysit kids and be home on the same days as their, kids in other schools. I know it seems like an impossible thing to take on in a way with the high school, but is there any room for us to be considering that, and for all you brilliant minds to be thinking about it?
Well, Andy gave me some high praise. He called me reasonable. And, I think we'll continue to be reasonable. I think one of the things that we're pretty heavily invested in is working with the elementary principals and making sure we can get the daycare cohort set. In my mind, that's a priority. And then, then the other cohorts will work out. As you probably figure, every time you make an exception, you create an exception. And so we do have to kind of be consistent in our expectations. But at the same time, we also have to continue to support families as a unit. So still to be discovered for us.
Great.
Eli Gould.
Hi, it's actually Jess Gould. I'm using.
Oh, hi, Jess.
So I don't want to take up too much time, but I just wanted to, because I hadn't heard it too often here, that I really just wanted to give a shout out to all the school principals. And I've had a lot of excellent communication from all the schools. I have elementary and high school. And I'm really excited that you guys are putting this together. It was a little bit scary to think that we wouldn't actually have school. So even just having 2 days a week, I'm really excited, and I really appreciate all the hard work that you guys are doing to put this together. And it's a huge thing for our kids in particular to even just think about going back for a little while. And I want to make sure that the board knows that there's a lot of really excited parents to get our kids back to school. So really, thank you.
Thank you, Jess.
Thanks, Jess. Any other questions?
So David, I did want to mention as we wrap this up, there were a couple other things while I just want to point from completely aside from this, but it ties into some of the work at Academy School. And I want to say that the Smith family has donated a significant amount of use of their land. I'm not sure if John Sessions is with us tonight, but John, are you here with us right now?
I am, Andy, yeah.
So I was going to mention this last week, and can we just take a minute? John has been working closely with the Smith family about some work that they're doing, and I'd like for him to share what's going on there, because it's really exciting for the community, and I do think we have to formally recognize the family for what's going on there.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to talk about that. So as Andy mentioned, the Smith family owns hundreds of acres of land that lies behind Academy School that they generously let us use. And starting this past winter, we started working with a group of parents and folks in the Academy School community in designing a community bike park in the area behind Academy School. So I've been working closely with Hank Lang as a representative of the Smith family and a number of parents and community members to design both a bicycle pump track and some lower level trails throughout the woods. That's a collaborative effort between the Smith family and the Academy School community and members of the general Brattleboro community. The vision is to develop this park both to be used as an Academy School resource to get kids outside in a healthy, engaging way, but also outside of school hours to be available to members of our community and to get kids on bikes as much as possible and outside in the woods and on the trails. And so we're in the phase now of fundraising. This is not necessarily purely a school initiative, so we're working collaboratively with our community to raise some funds to make it happen and have planned our first community build day for the 15th of August. So we just wanted to make the board members specifically aware of this initiative. Excellent.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Sure.
Any other questions?
I have a question, but I can't figure out how to raise my hand. I apologize.
Well, go ahead and ask it then. We can see you. You figured out how to solve that problem.
I'm Tammy McNamara. My question is, what does the timeline look like for a deadline for when will we be asked to make a final decision as to is my child attending school or not? And what format will we be able to receive more information prior to making that decision?
So we'll have information probably as we have updates for things sent out to parents. So that survey was an initial scan of things and where we'd like to see people. If for some, and then we'll have some outreach that goes out to families that said they would like the remote piece. We'll have some information that will go out to families to kind of confirm what those have to be, and we'll figure whether it comes out from a central office or a school level. And then we'll have more information around what those learning models come out within the next week or two. With all of these, you can contact us if you have additional questions around those things, or school leaders as well. I would imagine those kind of graphical representations of what the days could kind of look like, and some of those class lists will go out within the next 2 weeks to people to get a sense of what that would look like to get more information. Remember, a lot of the work, it's easier to go into remote from in-person instruction than it is from remote into in-person, just because of the spatial limitations with those things.
So is there a deadline we'll be asked to make a decision by?
We are still evaluating those items. We would like to have our class list set. And a lot of it's also going to depend upon, do we have an extension of the school of the summertime and a delayed opening? And if that comes from the Agency of Education or the Governor office. So that will also drive some of that work. We want to make sure we get it right as early as possible. I would imagine by mid-August, we'd like to have those lists set as close to possible so teachers can plan and understand what they're looking at for the school year, and for families to plan as well.
Any other questions? Thanks for jumping in, Tamara. Seeing none, I think we'll move on in the agenda from the first item, which is public comment on non-agenda items, and look at the rest of administrative reports. We do have, I'm not sure if there are others, but we do have one action we need to take from Guilford. I don't know if John is still here.
I'm still here, David.
Oh, great, John. Could you tell us the nomination? You have two, and you want to do one now and one later? I'm not sure. You can do whatever you want, so we can vote for you.
Thank you, David. We have two parents that are interested in joining the Leadership Advisory Council. They have both written letters of interest. One is Alexis Monsavichis, and the other person is Kitsu LaRock.
So I would ask for a motion to approve the two members, community members to the Leadership Council in Guilford as presented. Kelly, you're not muted. Why don't you do it?
So moved.
Thanks, Kelly. And I have a second, please.
Second, Liz.
Thank you, Ann. And I believe Wendy has the names. So any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please unmute and signify by saying aye.
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 But I believe the second came from Liz, not me.
Oh, well, thank you. And any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passed, and John has two new members. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other items under administrative reports, Sandy?
Dave, we have a hiring at the high school for a PE teacher. So Steve, you want to share your?
Sure. I'm pleased to recommend the selection of Mr. Matthew Green as a physical education teacher at the high school. Matt has got his bachelor's degree in physical education from Keene State College. He has been a teacher at Academy School for a few years now. And we had 6 applicants. We interviewed 3, and Matt clearly rose to the top. So I would ask that the board appoint Matt Green as a PE teacher at BUHS.
Thank you. Could I have a motion, please, to appoint Matt Green to the PE position at BUHS?
So moved, Jackie.
Thank you, Jackie. And the second?
Second. It's Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle. Has been moved and seconded to accept the appointment of Matt Green to BUHS. All those in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the ayes have it, and Matt is appointed. Let's see.
I believe that's. Do we have any other hires that we didn't catch yet? I thought we had them all. Principals. Great.
Speaking of that, I actually skipped over something that I wanted to mention at the end of the past part, because we are still hiring, and I think we need to redouble our efforts to reach out more broadly to find candidates of color. I know there's a lot of pressure right now, but it's easy to let that go. And so again, we don't have a strategy yet. We haven't gotten really professional advice or any more professional advice. We don't really have a plan, a long-term plan, or anything in place. But we can certainly expand at least the school spring offerings. They have an additional, at a higher price, they have an additional distribution that they can use, and there probably are other things. You can check with Lyle for specifics, or I can find out if you need help. But for all principals to really get that on the front burner, as was said earlier.
Yeah, and we do have some central office support positions. We're looking at administrative support positions that we're posting further down into Massachusetts, where we may get higher density population areas as well, to see if we can develop a deeper pool of candidates.
Great, thank you. Anything else? Administrative reports. Okay, I've got a financial stability, I had asked Frank to, if he had the direction, the guidance yet, to give us a sense of what sorts of expenses. I think we had a $600 and some thousand outlay so far. And what kinds of, what are we going to be reimbursed for that we've already done? And are things like the 1% work that teachers are doing right now, which would not be happening if it weren't for COVID, and additional staff, are those things going to be covered by the COVID money, the CARES money? I know the positions are only, the money's only until January, so any position would only be a half a year position. But again, just an update on where we are fiscally and what kind of support we can expect.
Sure, I can give you a brief update. We did get correspondence from the Agency of Ed, and if anyone would like to see that, it's also a memorandum on the Vermont Department of Education's website. When you go to the website, there is a red COVID banner right at the very beginning of that, and then so that's the guidance that we have just recently received. Fortunately, there's no surprises in there. So anything related to the public health emergency as it relates to responding to the pandemic that were unbudgeted are eligible for the Corona relief funds. And so that includes things like the questions, many of the questions you heard tonight, much of what Andy had discussed, you know, tent rentals or purchases. There's a great deal of personal protective equipment, the planning costs. There's a number of technology purchases to facilitate the either online learning or to improve readiness for using technology in instruction in a different way than was originally planned. So professional development, David, as you have just referred to, these are all covered. There are two categories of funding, and we spoke a little bit in theory about this the last board meeting with Becca Ballant. Carrie Amidon asked the question that was very much on my mind as well. If we get the grant money, do we lose the education funding in the new year? The answer is one category of funding we do. That's called the Elementary Secondary Relief Act. They're calling it the ESSER funds. That's primarily simply a swap for if we claim that resource, they reduce our education funding. So it's really just a wash, and it's a mechanism for the state of Vermont to utilize federal money in a bigger picture. I think what we'll be mostly interested in is the CRF funding. So that's the Corona relief funding. They're both about the same amount of money, $28 million for the state. So we're going to be focusing on that mechanism. As I said, it's just been released. So we'll be going through the process of applying for reimbursements that go back to March 9th when the pandemic was formally announced and it affected the way public schools operate in Vermont. And that funding we will apply through December 30th of 2020. We've had correspondence, and you would see it if you went to the website, that says if the 28 million is fully dispersed, as we expect it will be statewide, the legislature has reserved additional funding to address additional costs. So we'll see to what extent that's needed. But at this point, it appears from what we see so far that those unbudgeted expenses are going to be covered through at least December 2020.
Great. Thank you, Frank. That's good news. Any questions for Frank? It's convoluted, to say the least. It's unfortunate that the emergency funds are not going to actually add to our bottom line, that it's basically that amount's going to be deducted, but the CRF funds should be adequate to, or maybe more than adequate, more than we can spend between now and January 1st, but we can try.
Right. Yeah, I do think it's likely, Dave, given, Andy's earlier update to 641,000, we're anticipating in total on a statewide basis, we would be looking at somewhere around 800,000 if we were the average school. So, that only leaves a couple of 100,000 between what we've already spent and, December. So I'm confident that we will see that fully utilized. That will, really benefit our programs and our readiness.
Great. Thank you, Frank.
Sure.
I see two hands up. Tim?
Just a quick question, Frank. Can CRF funds be used for payroll?
Yeah, it does. It does depend. So it would be something like our COVID coordinators. That's a new unbudgeted service. It's payroll related. So absolutely, yeah. But something like actual online instruction, the thinking there is we budgeted for instruction, and that is still occurring. The federal guidelines are saying, well, you're not substantially changing your original appropriation, so that's not a reimbursable expense because we had already budgeted it in local funds.
So it can be used for added transportation for added bus drivers?
It could be for that, yes. And keep in mind, transportation to and from school is heavily subsidized by the regular state funding. So, that it doesn't have as big of an impact, but it's certainly helpful.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Thank you. And Ruby, is this a question about fiscal affairs?
It is.
Great.
This is Ruby McAfee from Putney. Frank, I wanted to know to what extent you're aware of the CRF funds being tracked by district in terms of how much is being used in each district. And I guess my question also extends to within our own merged district. Is there a way in which the school board will be tracking what one school is spending versus another, and equity questions there?
To some extent, that will be readily available, but in other circumstances where expediency is of the utmost importance, for example, the thermometers, the masks, and those types of expenses, we're under pressure to get those orders in as soon as we can, and we're also doing it in a very much a district-wide coordinated fashion. So that will not be as easy to pin to a specific school, but on the other hand, those are very much student consumables. So it wouldn't be hard to associate, let's say, $25,000 worth of PPE equipment and how that's dispersed to the various schools, even though it's a central order. So I think maybe what I would assume what you would be more interested in is to what extent have we had to invest in various types of infrastructure that helps learning, and those kinds of improvements will be tracked at the school level, because each site is, varies. They're coming from different places with different needs. So typically we will see a lot of site-based reimbursements there.
Great. Thank you. Other questions? Okay, we'll move to unfinished business. The item that was on the previous agenda was attracting BIPOC people to join leadership councils. And what I'd like to propose is that we table that, because I know we're going to be talking about leadership councils at our retreat next week, just sort of looking at what the intention was and what has, now that they're all in place in all the buildings, whether they're what we had in mind, and being clear about what the policy and the guidelines are for leadership councils, and certainly the makeup of them would be part of that conversation. So I'm going to table that one, or put that off till our retreat. Under new business, 1% applications, do we still have Dummerston 1% request, Andy? I forgot what you said about that.
It went through the personnel committee last week.
Yeah, we still have to approve it though.
Personnel was able to pass it. I think it was in their charter to be able to do that. So they.
Okay, we'll check. The contract says board, so I don't
Okay.
think a charter can supersede that.
Okay.
So we'll work on that. But in the meantime, could you tell us about it so we can affirm or somebody from personnel tell us what it was so we can affirm it?
Yep. Is Julianne, are you here? I'm kind of scanning the.
Here, I'm here.
Do you want to talk about your 1% request?
Sure. So before we left school, of course, normally teachers apply for 1% work as teams based on special projects they're working on, planning for the upcoming year. And with the nature of the closure, a lot of our staff at Dummerston were thinking that there were so many unknowns in terms of how to structure their 1% work that we decided to basically create kind of a one application that would identify all of the various tasks associated with summer work that teachers would be doing together. So so there's on the application, there's a list of 5 or 6 umbrella categories of that work. It could have been 50 different umbrella categories, but those are sort of the big umbrellas. For example, thinking about our outdoor learning environments and nature-based education and how we're going to capitalize on that for the coming school year. Thinking about our MTSS model and what does that look like in this current structure. How are we integrating special teachers so that our hybrid model and our remote model are really, robust. So those are just some examples of the types of activities that are in the application. And then it represents about 20 days of work. So teachers are contacting me if they're available in August to come together in teams to do this work. And, it just really will allow, them to have some time to get creative together on tackling some of these issues.
Right. And I haven't seen the proposal, so is it specific enough that we can disaggregate the ones that are related to COVID as opposed to working on MTSS?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
We can be reimbursed for the professional development related to the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Can you identify those parts of that cost so we can apply for that reimbursement?
Yeah, I mean, all of the activities are associated with preparing for this type of hybrid model.
I see. Okay, great.
Yes, I mean, they're all designed to do that.
Yeah, when you mentioned MTSS, that seemed like sort of like ongoing work as opposed to specific. Great.
Yeah, sure.
Great, thank you. So can I have a motion to approve the Dummerston 1% application?
So moved.
Thank you, Thomas. Second, please.
Second.
Thank you, Tim. It's been moved and seconded to accept the Dummerston 1% application. Any discussion? And then the last thing, although we do need an executive session, the last thing is our board retreat. And this is currently scheduled for next Wednesday, a week from this Wednesday, August 5th, I believe that is. And we had talked about having it in person, and we can use the Kiwanis shelter in Memorial Park in Brattleboro, which is a large covered area with dozen or more more than a dozen picnic tables, and would be very easy to physically distance ourselves and meet in person. Two of our members are concerned about health compromise, being health compromised, and will not choose to attend. So
I'm afraid you have to make that 3, Dave.
3, okay. So 3 of our members. So what I wanted to do is, since everybody else is having to make these decisions about equitable and inequitable, and is the value of us being able to be physically together for the first time, almost, well, for one person, first time ever. The rest of us have been together once when we formed the board. Is that valuable enough to for us to try and do it and have 3 people calling in on a phone? Or do we want to meet in a Zoom remotely and do it the way we've been meeting all along? So I didn't want to make that decision on my own. I wanted to hear from people and just see where we are on that question. Lots of chin rubbing. Jackie?
I think that we should do it by Zoom and wait till a time that everybody's comfortable being together distantly, but together to have our first. It's not going to have the same impact for me if all of us are not there. And it's also out in public. We might have a great phone connection. It might be terrible. So some people, it could create a situation of inequity because some people that are not there physically could easily miss important things.
Thank you. Kelly?
I would be fine either way. So however, if everybody else chooses.
Okay. Other thoughts?
I agree with Jackie.
Thank you, Tim. Bryn?
Hi, Bryn Tucker. I teach at Green Street and I'm a parent, and clearly I'm not weighing in on the board decision, but I just want to weigh in on listening to the conversation. And I'm sorry, I'm a little emotional hearing that the board does not feel comfortable to meet in person, but yet we're asking our educators and our families to come back together to meet in person. And I want that really to sink in for everyone who is at this meeting to realize the gravity of that, of what is being asked of teachers and families in this moment.
Thank you, Bryn. That's why I put it on the
Thank you. Thank you.
Emily?
Yeah, I think it makes sense equity-wise for everybody to be there if possible. So maybe doing a Zoom meeting until it's possible might be the best option.
Thank you. Thomas?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I wish that I did feel it was that it was safe for us to meet. I don't feel comfortable personally, and I won't. And personally, I don't think anyone should be made to meet. So that's my point of view. I wish it was not the case.
Any other thoughts or comments?
I have something to say.
Yeah, Michelle. Yep. Sorry,
Yep.
just by your hand.
I would actually be supportive of still meeting, but as a parent, I'm sorry I missed who just spoke, but I literally had that same emotional punch that felt like we just spent all this time discussing putting teachers and kids back in a group, and that just, it feels so hypocritical, and that we're not matching, that we're in a different place for a small group setting. And we actually are a small group. Our group would be about as big as most of our classrooms are intending to be. So I understand that sentiment. and it did. I felt like I got sucker punched as everyone kind of chimed in, but I would be okay with meeting in person, even partially, or having them, do like a FaceTime or something so they could try to be present. But I hear that point, and I stand with that woman very much so, and our teachers and our kids.
Other thoughts from the board? Well, I think we have either a consensus or ambivalence to meet via Zoom. So we won't order dinner. And Andy and I will figure that out. We had scheduled it for 5 p.m. thinking we would meet for a while, eat, and then meet some more. So we'll leave that schedule in place, and people can just, if you think that we should start at 6 so you can actually eat dinner beforehand, or any adjustments or any thoughts you have about how to change the timing of that. It's just, we can schedule it just for our regular meeting time as well. But since it's meant to be a retreat, and we would like to have a little more time to go into depth on a number of issues. Some of it, I think, is going to be nuts and bolts for what we want to hear from on administrative reports, but other issues that we've been talking about all year are things we want to really prioritize and go into depth on. So just think about it. Think about how we might want to set it up and carry it out. So Wendy, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, David. I just want to make sure I know for my schedule. Is this something that you need a board recorder for?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So any other comments from the board? We have two public comments, Molly and then Ellen.
Yeah, thanks, David, so much. I just want to echo again what Bryn said. I had just sent the same text, the same words in a text to somebody. And just tonight's meeting has left me feeling more unsettled than I have yet. And I want to explain to you why. And I have been crying, and I'm sure I'll cry again as I talk about this. But as a teacher, I'm doing things like planning advanced directives and things like that right now. And I just want to make sure that the board, I guess what made me feel uncomfortable tonight and more unsettled than usual is that I felt like we were in action mode. And I think sometimes when people go into action mode, we forget the larger questions, and we forget the values and everything that guides us in our action. And I was hearing us, someone else is on, sorry. I was hearing us very much in action mode, and that made me feel really scared as an educator, because I want to make sure that we're still continuing to constantly question whether we're doing the right thing. And we live in a really safe state, and I know that you know, I'm managing my own anxiety on a personal level, but please, please, please hear what Bryn says, hear what other teachers are saying, hear what I'm saying when I say that these are really huge decisions, and please keep in the forefront, not just the actions we're taking, but the depth of what we're asking families and teachers to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Molly. I think of just to go back to the very beginning when the first thing we talked about was, or the first thing that I mentioned is that what we're focusing on is the safety of our learners and the adults who work with them. And if we don't feel like we're based on all the best guidance and the best science and the best recommendations and the best precautions and the best health advice, if we don't feel like we're confident that we can do it as safely, we won't. And I think that's true across the state and probably across the country. And so I mean, there's no way to take away the fear. We're all afraid. I mean, I'm 73 years old and I'm a former smoker, and I wanted to meet with my colleagues because I just want to see them and work with them again. But that would be a really stupid thing for me to do. And I'm afraid too. We're all afraid. And we're trying to make something that's going to meet as many needs as we possibly can without doing any harm. And I don't think that there's anybody, I mean, we are in action mode because that's what we have to do, is to prepare for what the state requires us to do, which is teach kids for 175 days, 2 to 5.5 hours a day. But if we can't do that safely, it's not going to happen. And I think the things that teachers are going through, like what you described, I hadn't thought about that part, but my wife and I have those conversations. She teaches in elementary school as well. We have those conversations as well. And we're all afraid. And we're all looking to do this as safely, to get it right. And to take advantage of the things we know and the things that do work, like being outside as much as possible, things like that.
And I really honor all the work. I don't mean to imply that I don't. I just would ask you to hold simultaneously those action steps with the just the really intense depth of what we're being asked to do. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. It's it would be easy to end the meeting and not have heard that and not be thinking about that. Ellen and then Beth.
While Molly was talking, I was not muted, and what I had said was, I don't think I could ever say this as eloquently as Molly, but I just want to also echo the courage that to Bryn for speaking up with such courage. And this time, throughout this whole meeting, I've felt like there's been so much work and so much putting our heads to the grindstone and figure out how to do this, because it's what we're being told by our administration, and that's what he's been told by our national administration. And there's a time when courage comes into play, and who's going to be the first district to say, yeah, we're in a safe state. I'm very curious what the teacher survey that wasn't shared. I'm really curious how many teachers really said that they didn't feel that they could go back safely, not because of their own anxiety, but because we're in a public health crisis. And are we going to contribute to that public health crisis by opening the schools in a very safe state where we're all get our anxiety raised when we go down to the river and we see cars from New York and Connecticut, and what's going to be the impact of that, and then what's going to be the impact of opening our schools. And if we're not even testing, we're not even having the courage to say, let's just start with a basis and test all the teachers, test all the kids, see where we are right at the beginning. Why are we waiting for a directive? Because right now our country doesn't really have a clear direction, and that's where our courage comes in. And we're the brave little state, and I think we can do some really courageous things. And it might be to say, this doesn't make sense right now, at least to talk about it, and not to act as though there's a lot of really intelligent parents and teachers and administrators, but when we're being sold a plan that we have not been consulted about in the least, it's a very unsettling feeling. And then to have the board not even be able to get together because of their own concerns. Can you imagine being asked to go be with a group of kids every day that aren't tested? So we don't know. Maybe they have COVID, maybe they don't. Anyway, thanks again, Bryn, for starting that conversation.
Thanks, Ellen. Beth Bristol and then Kelly Young.
Sorry, wait, just the last thing I wanted to say was I would love to hear Andy's comments about Bryn's initial.
Beth?
Sure. So I also just wanted to share the sentiment. I'm very disappointed that the board's not leading by example and showing staff that they can meet if they think that it's safe enough for the teachers and the students to meet. So I'm disappointed in that. My second question is the retreat that you're speaking about, is that not under open meeting law? Is that not going to be open to the public if no board recorder will be present?
We don't conduct any business at the retreat. It's not an official meeting.
Okay, then the purpose of the retreat is what?
To set our goals for the year.
Why would that not be public?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't looked into it. It never has been, we never have really had minutes or had it recorded or warned it. It's just, well, that might not be true. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, I would
I don't
be
recall that.
interested. I mean, maybe it wasn't the precedent, but I would be interested in knowing why it can't be and interested in having it open to the public.
Well, it could be, and I'll check and see.
Great.
There's no reason it wouldn't be. It's just not anything that we've ever done before that anybody had any interest in participating in. But I'll check on that and we'll do it right.
Thank you.
David, Putney
Liz, wait, please.
Sure.
Thank you. Kelly?
So I don't usually share about my own children, in particular my youngest son, for his own privacy and respecting that. But we asked him what was it he wanted to do. He's at the high school, and what was it that he wanted to do? And he recognized that he needed to be at school. Now, if that's only for 2 days, it's only for 2 days. But the experience of this past spring, he recognized that he needed to be at the school. Now, I'm not saying that I have the answer or that's the answer for everybody or anybody other than my son. And I'm not saying that he should take priority over anybody else. We have family members in other districts throughout the state who are teachers and are expressing the same concern that I've heard from teachers and parents and even students online and et cetera. But I just wanted to say that, of course, we want all teachers and students to be safe, because you are what you're what the school board's certainly about. You are what the school is about. And for a large portion, the town is about. So we do have a real big interest in the safety of all of you. But I just wanted to mention that there are some students that really do need to be there. They feel the need to be there, and I hope that we can do it safely. And that's all I want to say.
Thanks, Kelly. Emily and then Liz.
I wanted to make a request. I know Andy had said that he wouldn't be sharing the teachers survey, at least not at this meeting, but we did see some preliminary results of the parent/student, I guess it's mostly parent, but parents responding for their students survey. Even if it has to be in an executive session for certain reasons, I would really like the board to see the teacher survey. I think that's important as we move forward, just so we have full information about how teachers are feeling, and if we're responsible for leading the schools, then we should know how the majority of the people who work in the schools feel. So how do I make that request? Aside from just saying it, does it have to be formalized, or David?
I think you just made the request.
Okay.
I think Andy will determine what to do.
Yeah, and please understand, my reluctance to share things is not to obscure or obfuscate by any means, but you're really the importance of the microscope that teachers are under right now, and the way that while we have an engaged body within this meeting right now, it's really important for us to remember that in many areas of this world and in our country, and whether it's on social media or in other areas, are kind of vilifying teachers for the reluctance to want to return to the classroom. And I don't want to put any information out there without the publicly. I can share it. I can share information with the union president and with the EA. But I think it's really important that we've got to be cognizant of the fact that there will be groups that take this and now pillory teachers as a result of their feedback around just sharing some concerns about being present. And that just feeds a level of anxiety that people are feeling. And I think we owe it better to our staff, to not put them in a position. They're already in a critical position as it is around what we're asking to do and the level of concern that we all have around schools, that we can't put them into that position where they're again put up in a spotlight and cast upon things unfairly by people that may not necessarily understand education, understand schools and how schools operate, and it may tend to operate that way. But I can find the survey results, and we can identify a motion for executive session to talk about employee items.
Thank you.
Liz?
Yeah, I just want to point out that Putney always had a board retreat. Brattleboro had them. I know Dummerston had them, and they were not considered, they didn't have to be warned, and there were no minutes ever posted on any of those. So you may want to check it out further, David, but it's what has gone on in the past.
Yep, I know, but I will check it out just so we get it right. It's a good question. Rob and then Michelle. Robin, are you muted?
Sorry, yes, I was muted. Thank you. I was actually speaking to what Liz and was just saying and what you guys were talking about, because I had remembered differently, and I just checked on, on WSESU.org, the legacy board agendas, and on BCTV, and the last 3 retreats of the Brattleboro Town School Board were filmed on BCTV, and there was warned agendas. Now, I don't know if that was because we were combining some business with our retreat, but I think there is a precedent for having this be a public meeting that people have access to, especially if you're, this is a moment where I think people are feeling really locked out of the communication process. So I would ask the board to consider having that be something that people could view, if not participate in. Also, I just wanted to say, I really appreciate the carefulness that Andy is approaching this issue with about what teachers are feeling and responding. I just want to say that I think that there is, in our community, also a significant amount of parents out here who are in solidarity with the teachers and don't want to put our kids into the schools if it's going to make teachers have to go to work and feel unsafe. And I think that a significant amount of the people who responded that they would prefer remote schooling have that as one of the concerns that is informing their view. So I just wanted to put that out there. I'm not trying to pressure the information to be shared if that would cause divisiveness, but I just want teachers to know that there are a lot of parents standing with you and wanting to keep you safe just as you are wanting to keep our kids safe.
Thanks, Robin. I just want to say again, it's the as far as the retreats, it's never been a question about whether it was a executive session sort of activity or not. There just was never any interest in people attending. It was pretty boring, but this is a different time, and we will find out. And I anticipate, unless we have to, that it'll be public and we'll film it. But we'll see. Michelle and then Kelly.
So I raised my hand right before Andy made your point sort of about vilifying teachers. And I'm going to basically say what Robin just said too, is that actually I really think that our community is expecting us to be accountable to our teachers' needs, and they want to trust us and that we're being responsible in that process. I came into this with 3 pages of questions, and Andy, you did a remarkable job. I think you hit on so many things. Literally, like the second thing, as can you share what teachers' representation looks like in this process? People needed to hear that there's union representation, and in parentheses, how are we meeting their needs? The biggest things I'm hearing are, the schedules, can we navigate childcare by working together, and can they accommodate that? And are teachers being heard? What about their kids? What about their schedules? There's just not childcare options in our community, and people really care. And, these are our neighbors and our friends. Many of our teachers have children in our schools or in other schools. And I would expect that, I would just expect to see everyone the majority stand by our teachers. I know there's people who are desperate for schools to reopen, but I would anticipate that there's going to be a need for accountability and communication about this topic so that families, know that our teachers above all are being supported because they're the ones doing the work and stepping up and on the front line.
Thanks, Michelle. Kelly?
There was one other thing that I forgot to say, which was that I as well as just like every other parent, I have been concerned about it, and I remain concerned about it. But I was felt a lot of relief in hearing at the very beginning when Andy was talking about the different things that they're doing and the different ways that they're trying to accommodate people that have different levels of either anxiety or different levels of medical needs, or whatever it is that causes them to feel like they have to make this tough decision one side or the other. I actually appreciated a lot. It seems like there is a lot that's going on behind the scenes that even, that I'm not aware of, that, I'm hearing it's being reported now, but to us here, but they're doing a lot behind the scenes, and I wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you, Kelly.
Any other questions or comments? Thomas?
I'd just like to recognize that this situation, first of all, was unfair and impossible for Andy to take on his first thing being a superintendent, so sorry about that. But this is because of a failure from the top. This is a failure that the federal government completely failed us in this issue. It went to the state. Every state is overwhelmed by this, and they passed it on to every school board around the country. I'm looking at all different school boards around the country. They're the people being forced to make these lose-lose situations that either you risk people's health or you risk developing children's education. That's the situation that we're in, and there's no outcome from this that is positive. So it's the dilemma that we've been put into unfairly and really shamefully by the people at the top. So that's where we are now, and everyone is angry in this situation, I think.
And frightened. Thanks, Thomas. Other comments? Any other thoughts? I would just ask any media representatives that joined us in the middle of the meeting to please watch the whole thing before you decide what you say about us. And I would like a motion to enter executive session under VSA 313 to discuss a student issue where premature public knowledge would put the district and or persons at an unfair advantage.
So moved. Ann.
Thank you, Ann. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Thomas. All in favor of executive session, please say aye.
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 Okay, we will wait a few minutes for people to leave, and I will put Rich in the waiting room.
Hey, David.
Yes.
Are you going to be coming out of executive session with a decision? Do I need to stick around?
I'm not sure. I would say, yeah, I would say stick around.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So I'll move you and Rich over.
Okay.
Let's see. So I'm going to go through and.
So David, we're going to make sure all the principals go home, all the school leaders go home.
Do we want Julianne to stay?
I can inform her what any sort of decision may have to be. I think they have it all.
We're out of executive session at 9:20. We have a motion to accept the recommendation as the administrator's recommendation as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Ann. Second?
Second.
Second from Emily. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, we have passed the motion. Now we're going to enter executive session again under Vermont 313 on a personnel matter where premature public knowledge would put the district or the people involved at a disadvantage. So a motion to, and Wendy, we will not take action after this one, so I will send you the time of our adjournment, and you can go to bed too.
All right, thank you, David.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
All right, Wendy, thank you.
So a motion to enter executive session, please.
So moved.
Second? Just a second.
And David, I can tell Wendy when we adjourn in the email I sent her with everything.
Oh, even better. Thank you. Okay, and Rich, do you want waiting room anyway? We're done filming. You're not, you're muted. Oh, you're co-recording it. Okay, so back in the waiting room. I can't hear you, but I can see the light shining, so you're there. Okay, so waiting room it is. Wave if you don't want to go.